In a world where money is everything and life means nothing, a drug gang stalks the streets of Chicago. They are heavily armed, well-funded, and have dangerous international contacts. It will take every weapon in the FBI's arsenal to stop a deadly threat known as the El Rukans.
In the 1980s, the drug trade ravaged Chicago's inner-city neighborhoods. Heroin and cocaine sales soared. Violent crime threatened to destroy the community. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As drug profits grew, gangs ruled the streets. One of the most dangerous was called El Rukan. Agents teamed up with state and local police to bring them down, but in the process, uncovered a bizarre and frightening terrorist plot.
Chicago, Illinois. In the early 1980s, it is one of the deadliest major cities in America. Powerful drug gangs have transformed the South Side from a neighborhood into a war zone. To combat the rising tide of violence, the FBI forms the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. In Chicago, their prime target is a vicious gang known as the El Rukans. John Podliska is an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago.
The business of the El Rukans was to traffic in narcotics, cocaine and heroin, and to control a vast area on the south side of Chicago for purposes of selling and distributing those narcotics. They would exact tribute from other people who would want to sell in that area, and they had a reputation, and a well-deserved reputation, for being one of, if not the most successful and the most violent criminal drug-dealing organizations in the Chicago area.
In the spring of 1985, several members split from the gang. They try to move in on El Rukan territory. Revenge is swift and deadly. Chicago's South Side is gripped by a vicious turf war. As the murder rate climbs, the FBI seems powerless to stop the violence. Then, in May, an informant gives agents a tip. Several members of the El Rukan gang have left Chicago. They are hiding out in a house in Cleveland. Many of them are wanted for murder. FBI agents and Cleveland police raid the house and arrest several suspects. One of them is a man named Anthony Sumner. Sumner is a former El Rukan general, which makes him potentially useful. If investigators can turn him, they can get intelligence on the secret of El Rukans.
Sumner, how you doing?
Detectives question Sumner for hours. He implicates himself in a double homicide in Chicago and is facing serious time. Authorities offer to reduce charges, but only if Sumner tells them everything he knows about the El Rukans. Finally, the former El Rukan general agrees to cooperate. As Sumner talks to authorities, a terrifying picture emerges. The El Rukan gang has hundreds of members, They're heavily armed, they're well organized, and they're growing.
That's nuts.
The entire organization is run by Jeff Fort, a kingpin known for his efficiency and his brutality.
That's Jeff Ford.
He was at the top controlling the entire organization. Directly below him were 21 generals, and he preserved his power that way. If anyone tried to seize power from him, from amongst those 21 generals, there were 20 other people who would be in a position to let him know that, and he could retaliate.
Authorities thought they had taken Ford out of commission. In 1983, he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 13 years in a Texas prison. According to Sumner, Jeff Fort continues to run the Rukans. He uses the prison payphones to contact his gang in Chicago. Sumner's statement is a major break in the Rukan case, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Deedy.
He was the first person to actually confirm what the authorities had thought for a long time, which was that Jeff Fort, who was currently in penitentiary in Texas, was regularly talking on the telephone to members of the Rukans in Chicago and coordinating or directing activities of the organization.
The Rukans run their operation out of a converted movie theater on the south side of Chicago.
It had been fortified by the Rukans and was essentially a fortified fortress. He had people at the headquarters of the Rukans who were required to sit by that phone 24 hours a day. There was always someone at the phone so that when he called, he could give his instructions, directions, and orders as to what he wanted done with his organization.
For the task force, Jeff Fort's telephone conversations are an opportunity to learn more about the organization.
Yes, Imam.
No one questioned what he said and what he wanted done. There was absolutely no debate, discussion, objection to anything that he was saying.
And so the FBI over the summer 1985 began to develop evidence to provide a sufficient probable cause to go and to begin to listen to these conversations.
Agents activate a 24-hour wiretap to record the Kingpin's phone calls. Tom Coram is a former special agent with the FBI. In 1985, he is assigned to the Drug Task Force and the Rukan case.
The technicians installed the wiretap equipment through the telephone company. Nothing was actually installed at the prison. We did all of our monitoring. In fact, in Austin, Texas, which was 40 to 50 miles away from Bastrop, Texas, where the prison was located. We were really stunned when we started hearing the conversation from Fort, because he was speaking with key gang leaders in Chicago, and what we were hearing was just strings of words.
Jeff Fort and his gang are talking in code.
And the kinds of series of words that we would hear said would be things like, in the science of Taku, love, truth, perfect man. And we had no idea what these words meant. And we couldn't establish any form of reference to figure out what he was saying during these conversations.
Agents believe that Fort and the Rukans are discussing drug deals.
Okay.
But until they crack the gang's code, they can't prove a thing.
One of the Chicago police officers came up with really a very good idea. The Chicago Police Department had uniformed officers almost on a daily basis make some sort of contact with the Rukan gang members just to let them know that the Chicago Police Department was in the neighborhood and that they were being watched. And so the Chicago detective came up with the idea of having one of the uniformed officers go up to the gang headquarters, speak to one of the gang leaders while Jeff Fort was on the telephone, and see if the gang members would encode what the police officer had said to the gang member and then feed it back to Jeff Fort in the coded form. And what we heard was the gang member come back up to the telephone where Jeff Fort was on the phone at the time and then encode that statement that had been made to him by the police officer. So at that point, we learned the code words for one, the word for pound, and the word for marijuana.
Now what about
And the word for marijuana, we found out at that time, was perfect man.
again?
Breaking the El Rukan code is slow, painstaking work. After 2 months, agents only know a fraction of the gang's business.
We realized that we were missing a lot of the calls that were being made from other phones at the El Rukan headquarters in Chicago. So we knew that the operation that we were running in Texas needed to be concluded, and we needed to set operations back up in Chicago and begin monitoring all of the phones inside the gang headquarters in order to get the whole story.
In December, Agent Coram and his team decide to move the wiretap operation to Chicago. They establish a new listening post near El Rukan headquarters. As authorities activate the new wiretap, they encounter a familiar problem.
When we turned the wire on in Chicago, I found that once again I was hearing words that I didn't understand.
The El Rukan gang is using a new code. They may have found out the FBI was listening. Once again, Agent Coram can't understand what they're saying.
It was like we had to start all over again when I thought we would be able to start pick up where we left off when we shut the operation down in Texas.
Hour after hour, Coram listens to the recordings. He slowly pieces together phrases.
Yeah, he's talked about New York
Something is different.
and Libya.
Something has changed.
Some of the words I started picking up were words like up. I started hearing words that related to travel, and there hadn't been any words that related to travel during the Texas operation. I started hearing references to New York, and I eventually heard a reference to Libya that really caused me to be really, really concerned about what changes had occurred during the 3 or 4 months that we had not been monitoring the telephones.
It's a chilling discovery. Libya, a rogue nation in North Africa, is suspected of state-sponsored terrorism. A well-armed drug gang, combined with foreign terrorists, could pose a deadly threat to national security. In Chicago, an FBI wiretap reveals that Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukan gang from prison.
Bring it all back to me.
Although the gang talks in code, authorities learn they are discussing Libya, a country suspected of terrorism. Investigators of the Chicago Drug Task Force spend hours listening to the recorded conversations. To Special Agent Tom Coram, it doesn't make sense. Why is a Chicago drug gang talking about Libya?
I went back to the beginning and started listening to the conversations again, and I started piecing the bits and pieces of the conversation together and came to the conclusion that they were talking about having met with someone in Libya who was going to provide them with money for destroying an airplane here in the United States.
Coram alerts the U.S. Attorney's Office. The drug investigation has uncovered a potential terrorist plot. The FBI calls in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Special Agent Ned Hamara is assigned to the Terrorism Task Force in Chicago.
We took it seriously because we had no idea whether it was real or not. It was decided that the Terrorism Task Force take over the wire and continue an investigation to determine what, if anything, was going on. The drug task force offered their agents to help with overhearing the wire talk and recorded conversations.
If authorities hope to unravel El Rukans' plans, they need to decipher the new code quickly and completely.
This is a conversation.
At that time, we took our surveillance teams and put them to work.
Fred Wheat is a lieutenant with the Chicago Police Department. His specialty is surveillance. In 1985, Wheat is assigned to the FBI's terrorism task force.
We were brought in because they knew that they would need surveillance, and also that a number of the Chicago police officers had worked El Rukans before and would be helpful in setting up the strategy to work this organization.
The surveillance team's job is to make physical observations that can be compared to the information agents are hearing on the wiretap.
We basically had round-the-clock surveillance on different members of the group who were involved with the conversations with Jeff Fort. We were watching those members and just trying to follow their activities. On one instance, one of the gang members reads a newspaper article to Jeff Fort and substitutes the code word for the actual newsprint. So, I mean, we had a verbatim interpretation of some of those code words because he describes an incident on the south side of Chicago where there was a shooting involving a landlord and a neighbor of some sort. And so we were able to take those code words and go back to previous conversations, insert them into conversations, which solved a lot of our deciphering of some coded conversations.
Okay. That's it.
Slowly, agents crack the new code. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI's Chicago field office.
The calls that are being intercepted at the El Rukan headquarters basically concern two areas. They concern the El Rukan's normal business of engaging in drug transactions, as well as what we are beginning to realize is a plot between the El Rukans and the government of Libya.
How'd it go?
Knowing the violent history of this particular organization, we were afraid that the El Rukans were going to commit an act of terrorism in the United States in order to obtain money from the Libyan government.
From the wiretap, authorities learned that several members of the El Rukan gang recently traveled to Libya. As agents continue to monitor the gang's conversations, the situation with Libya deteriorates. On April 2nd, 1986, a bomb detonates aboard TWA Flight 840 between Rome and Athens. 4 Americans are killed. 9 are injured. The FBI suspects the government of Libya and President Muammar Gaddafi are responsible for the carnage.
On April 4th of 1986, there was a series of conversations between Jeff Fort and a general in the El Rukan organization known as Melvin Mays. And they discussed this explosion on this flight between Rome and Greece. And Mays, at one point in the conversation, indicates that their group would be able to do something like that within 30 to 50 days.
Yeah.
It is a terrifying prospect.
I want you to take a video.
Via the decoded wiretap, the task force listens in on Fort's plans. The gang leader wants 2 of his generals, Leon McAnderson and Rico Cranshaw, to make another trip to Libya.
Fort was really concerned about how are we going to convince the Libyans, that we're an organization that can do something for them. One of the things that we were able to determine, he talked about getting newspaper clippings to take back over there to show the Libyans that this is what we've been doing, this is what we can do. Violent things that happen that the Rukans are responsible for. The whole idea was to convince the Libyans that the El Rukans were an organization big enough to commit some significant terrorist activity or acts in the United States on their behalf. We believed it was a real threat.
If McAnderson and Cranshaw return to Libya, federal agents will not be far behind. In Chicago, FBI agents and police wiretap the El Rukan gang. Two of Jeff Fort's generals are planning a trip overseas to convince Libyan officials that El Rukan can perform terrorist acts within the United States. Travel restrictions to Libya make the trip impossible. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
The United States had just engaged in at least 2 military actions against the Libyans, and the El Rukans knew that the Libyans were under scrutiny from the United States government. The El Rukans, as well as the Libyans, felt that the safest place for them to meet would be in Panama, which they called the Straw Hat. That was their particular code word for Panama.
Cranshaw and McAnderson, two high-ranking El Rukan generals, will make the trip to Panama City. The task force needs surveillance on both men from the moment they leave Chicago until they return. On May 3rd, Cranshaw and McAnderson leave El Rukan headquarters. A surveillance team is not far behind. The El Rukans board a jet in Chicago, bound for Miami. From there, they fly to Panama. In Panama, Cranshaw and McAnderson are seen entering the Libyan embassy, presumably to meet with government officials. And on May 10th, the two El Rukans return to the United States.
We knew when they were coming back, and we worked with our colleagues at U.S. Customs and asked them to do a search of these individuals when they arrived in Miami.
They found a document in Rico Crenshaw's luggage, which they photographed. Cranshaw and McAnderson were not aware that this was happening, but the document was in Crenshaw's handwriting.
Basically, they had written a letter that said that they had 5-man cells in cities throughout the United States and that they were interested in trying to destabilize the government.
The next day, on May 11th, the task force intercepts several telephone conversations between the two El Rukans and their leader, Jeff Fort. Cranshaw and McAnderson tell Fort the Libyans have agreed to provide financing. They will deposit the money in a Panamanian bank in the United States. An attorney they met in Panama will contact them shortly. For the task force, it's a terrifying development. But agents don't have enough evidence to prosecute the El Rukan gang on conspiracy charges.
In order for the FBI to establish that a crime has been committed, we must collect enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the conspiracy had actually taken place and that there was an intended goal of the conspiracy. And we had to prove that there was a serious plan to commit an act of terrorism here in the United States.
Agents continue to listen to the wiretap, hoping to learn more.
During June, Fort talks about sending El Rukans over to Libya to learn bomb-making skills. He said we can send some of the soldiers or members over there. They could learn how to make bombs. Those individuals can come back to the United States and teach other members how to make bombs.
As alarming as this scenario is, it's still not enough to prove a conspiracy. weeks go by. The money from the Libyans never shows up. Fort panics. He will do anything to make the deal.
In late June, early July, Fort became, well, he just saw that the money was not going to be coming from the Libyans and that he had to do something, or the Rukans had to do something to show the Libyans, you know, that they were somebody to respect. He talked about damaging a government building. He talked about planting bombs. He talked about blowing up an airplane. And he talked about getting a rocket, one that you can use once and throw away. So we figured, okay, how can we address this issue?
Through the wiretaps we're hearing.
Fort wants to buy military-grade weapons. The task force decides to use it to their advantage by becoming El Rukan's sole supplier.
Okay.
So enter Special Agent Willie Hulon. Willie was on the drug task force. He had already made one drug buy with Alan Knox through an FBI cooperating source.
Alan Knox is a high-ranking El Rukan. Agents assume he is aware of Fort's plans.
So we figured that we'd set up another drug buy with Alan Knox, and at which point Special Agent Hulon could introduce the idea that he had a weapons contact and so on, and that they might be able to supply the El Rukans or somebody else with weapons or any military equipment.
He mentions that he has a friend who works at a military base. A friend who can steal weapons. Knox is interested.
Willie Hulon is an amazing individual. He's cool, calm, collected, works well under pressure. He was ideal for this situation. His knowledge of the street gangs, his calmness and operating sources, and Willie was perfect for this role.
Knox tells Hulon about the kind of weapons the gang wants to buy.
They were interested in grenade launchers, and so when he described the grenade launchers, he said it's the type that Clint Eastwood used in the movie, which obviously is a law rocket.
The M72 Law rocket is the U.S. Army's primary light anti-tank weapon. The shoulder-launched missile can penetrate a foot of armor at a range of over 200 meters. It can destroy a tank, a building, or even a low-flying airliner. Agents cannot allow El Rukan to obtain such a deadly weapon on the open market. But the development does offer unique opportunities.
We decided that why not we supply, or the FBI supply, the El Rukans with a rocket.
Special Agent Willie Hulon negotiates with Alan Knox on the price.
You guys doing all right? Thank you. Yeah.
He tells Knox he can get Law rockets for $1,850 apiece.
Got a man on the inside.
Obviously, we weren't going to sell these guys a law rocket that they could use or would even work. But that being said, we wanted to sell them a device that looked like a real law rocket, and on a cursory inspection would appear to them to be a real law rocket.
And they will buy for that $2,200.
The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, constructs a dummy law rocket. Although it looks like the real thing, it does not contain an explosive charge. The ATF also installs a radio transmitter so agents can track the device from a distance. The inert rocket is ready. The trap is set. On July 29th, the task force launches the operation.
Take out an aircraft. Putting a tracking device.
On July 29th, 1986, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force launches a complex sting operation. Agents will attempt to sell a dummy law rocket to the Rukans, a gang of vicious drug dealers who are willing to sell out their own country to Libyan terrorists. Gang leader Jeff Fort takes the bait. He tells Alan Knox to set up the buy.
And we're hearing this on the wiretap after the meeting, so we know that it's going to go forward. The arrangements which were basically given to us by the Rukans was we were going to meet them where the transaction was going to occur.
The task force meets to plan the sting operation. The sale of the law rocket will go down at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois, 30 miles from Chicago.
Normally, we would have never conducted an undercover investigation like this because of the extreme danger to Agent Hulan, but the fact that we knew that the Rukans were dealing with the Libyans, we had to weigh those risks and ultimately decided that we could do it safely, that we could make the transaction safely and protect the life of our undercover agent.
Surveillance teams will form the outer perimeter, 4 blocks from the hotel.
Like I said, ultimately,
SWAT and undercover teams will form an inner perimeter, stationed in and around the hotel.
what's going to happen in our operation. At this point, we have the north, south.
On July 31st, agents from the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and the Chicago Police Department deployed to the hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They cannot fail. The lives of hundreds and possibly thousands of people are at stake.
On the night of the law rocket deal, we probably had in excess of 50 individuals spread out through different areas.
Surveillance teams assigned to the outer perimeter get into position. At 6:30 p.m., a car enters the perimeter. There are 2 men inside. Agents are unable to identify either one of them. Detective Wheat's surveillance team picks up the incoming vehicle. He follows it to a gas station nearby. At the gas station, Wheat is able to make a positive ID. Melvin Mays is the driver. Alan Knox is in the passenger seat.
Moments after Melvin had departed the gas station, we saw him go in toward the inner perimeter. We passed on the plate number of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle, the make of the vehicle, all pertinent information that would help us keep this vehicle under surveillance.
At the hotel, task force members get into position.
We had a complement of SWAT, other surveillance people, other case agents in adjacent rooms, down hallways, different floors. Everything to control that situation. We didn't want people from another floor coming up. We didn't want to have citizens who weren't a part of this deal getting caught in the crossfire if that happened. The outer teams were prepared to move in to help secure this area in the event that things went wrong, so that it was plenty of firepower there on hand to deal with any situation that might develop.
Mays and Knox arrive at the hotel within minutes. The sale is about to go down. The task force is ready. They know the Rukans are willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill Jeff Fort's orders and make the buy. On the night of July 31st, 1986, 2 members of the Rukan gang arrive at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They have arranged to purchase a light anti-tank rocket. Their goal, to prove to the Libyan government that the Rukans can operate as terrorists for hire. They have no idea that the man they are dealing with is an undercover FBI agent. Members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force can hear every word of the transaction. Detective Fred Wheat and his surveillance team is stationed 4 blocks from the hotel.
We heard a knock on the door. We could actually hear the physical knock. We heard some voices and someone asked who it was, etc. He was admitted into the room. We could hear them negotiate or talk about the sale of the rocket.
It's the launch. A little something extra I threw in.
Can't see the rocket launcher. Where's that?
It's on the photo. You know I don't do business like that. Where's the cash?
It's close.
You get your launcher when I get my cash.
A few minutes later, Melvin Mays leaves the hotel. He needs to get final confirmation from gang leader Jeff Fort before the sale can be completed. Mays returns to Rukan headquarters to wait for Fort's call.
Jeff Fort controlled every aspect of the Rukan organization, to include this transaction.
The wiretap picks up the phone call between Mays and Jeff Fort. Fort seems leery about the buy. He's worried that it's a setup. Fort instructs Mays to bring a young gang member back with him. They should arrive at the hotel in separate cars. If the buy is a setup, Jeff Fort would rather sacrifice a low-level gang member than risk one of his generals.
In other words, Fort did not want any contact or any trading of money between the undercover agents who he suspected and his generals.
Fort orders him to deliver the money to the hotel and then pick up the law rocket. The sale goes off without a hitch.
What you think? Maybe, sir. Still out there, right? Buddy doing business with you?
The Rukans have no idea that the law rocket is a dummy. The low-level Rukan takes off in the direction of Chicago. Surveillance units follow him onto the Dan Ryan Expressway.
At that point, we had surveillance behind them, in front of them, on the side of them, down the expressway, coming on at certain exits, getting off at certain exits.
Suddenly, the young gang member transporting the law rocket pulls over and stops. Seconds later, another vehicle pulls alongside him. It's Melvin Mays.
What are you doing? Stop.
As it turns out, the gang member's car has broken down. The law rocket is transferred to Mays' car.
Get back in your car.
We would not have known that it changed from one vehicle to the other or one person to the other unless we had a physical eye on that transaction.
The law rocket had been equipped with a radio transmitter, and we were using electronic equipment and physical surveillance to follow the rocket back to where they eventually stored it.
Mays drives to an apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue, a few miles from El Rukan headquarters. The gang members refer to this building as the Armory.
Then our job really began because at that point we were 24/7 on that location because we had to make sure that that law rocket was not moved.
Special Agent Ned Hamara continues to monitor the wiretap.
A couple days went by. Fort's fears were allayed that they weren't police, and in subsequent conversations, he says, okay, let's buy 5 more. You know, we want 5 more, and we're going to test one.
Task force members are worried. Fort has chosen a target to prove his terrorist capabilities. He intends to kill a Chicago police detective.
The detective who was kind of, he worked for the Gang Crimes Chicago Police Department, who was kind of a thorn for many years in the El Rukan side. They hated him, and they figured, okay, we're going to buy some rockets, but we're going to use one, and we're going to test it on him.
Gentlemen, according to the wiretap,
The attorneys and the agents all made a decision, okay, let's take it down now. Let's not wait any further, because we figured if they tried to test the law rocket, they're going to determine that it's a dummy rocket and it's going to blow a lot of people's cover.
The FBI makes a dangerous call. It's time to take down the El Rukan gang and put Jeff Fort behind bars forever. The FBI has the El Rukan gang on the hook. They have surveillance photos and wiretaps of the gang purchasing a dummy law rocket. From his prison in Texas, gang leader Jeff Fort instructs the El Rukans to buy 5 more rockets. He wants to test fire one of them to prove that his gang can perform terrorist hits for hire.
gentlemen, according to the wiretap,
We had to prevent the Rukans from actually doing something to try to impress the Libyans. We felt it prudent at that time that we'd gone along far enough, we had enough evidence to at least put them behind bars for at least weapon charges, if not the terrorist activities. We weren't going to take the chances that they were going to get a law rocket from an outside source and use it.
A live law rocket in the hands of a violent gang like the El Rukans would be catastrophic.
I think everybody decided it was time to take it down.
On the morning of August 5th, the task force launches simultaneous raids on El Rukan headquarters and on the apartment building they call the Armory.
That building at 39th and Drexel was a fortified fort. It had steel doors on both the front and rear and iron gates across the other doors. We had to use a burning bar that day to gain entry into the fort to execute our search warrant.
Go, 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 go! We went from surveillance officers to search and control officers. We began systematically arresting across the city all individuals that were involved in this plot.
In an office at El Rukan headquarters, authorities find travel itineraries to Libya for Rico Cranshaw and Leon McAnderson. The second arrest team raids the apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue.
I was at the location on South Kenwood. Our main objective was to find the Law Rocket. We're walking all through the complex, you know, behind the ATF agent who's got the beacon, and he's going upstairs and downstairs and all around. Oh, it's getting fainter, we're getting stronger. We were in there for, you know, it seemed like a half hour, and we're walking and we're still not getting it. Finally, we go down into the basement. And this is a rat-infested, roach-infested location. But when we're going down the stairs, it gets louder and louder and louder.
It's getting stronger right about here.
Finally, we decided it's got to be under the stairwell. So we ripped open the stairwell, and sure enough, the Law Rocket was there, along with about 35 other assortment of automatic weapons that we discovered. Some of them were submachine guns. Who knows, you know, how many weapons were used in crimes or murders or what. The main thing, we got the Law Rocket back before they were able to determine that it, you know, was an inert or dummy Law Rocket.
Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Hands up!
McAnderson and Cranshaw are arrested without incident. Alan Knox is also taken into custody. Melvin Mays is nowhere to be found. On October 30th, 1986, Jeff Fort, Alan Knox, Rico Cranshaw, and Leon McAnderson are indicted on charges of conspiracy, possession of weapons, and use of interstate facilities to carry on unlawful activities. Melvin Mays, who is still a fugitive, is placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In 1987, McAnderson and Cranshaw are convicted and sentenced to more than 50 years in prison. Melvin Mays eludes authorities for nearly 9 years. In 1995, he is arrested and convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Jeff Fort, who is already incarcerated, is sentenced to spend an additional 80 years in prison.
This was the first instance in the United States history that American citizens had been convicted for attempting to commit a terrorist act for a foreign government.
For Chicago police, the El Rukan case is a major victory. A dangerous street gang has been destroyed. For the FBI, the El Rukan case is a battle won in the ongoing war against terrorism. They work with perfect precision, stalking their prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. The payoffs are huge. Millions of dollars for a few minutes of violent work. They leave no evidence behind, but to get away, they're willing to leave bodies. The FBI and local police must stalk this dangerous gang of thieves and break up their bad company.
In Boston, FBI agents and local police tracked a gang of robbers who specialized in armored car takedowns. Their MO was familiar. The gang used precise timing to steal millions in cash and burn their getaway cars to destroy evidence. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the robberies grew more violent, agents launched a complex sting to trap a deadly ring of thieves and shut down their dangerous operation.
December 22nd, 1987. Outside Boston, Massachusetts, just before 8 a.m. A time when most professionals are heading to work. But today, a group of professional criminals are also on their way to a job. Their target is Weymouth, 18 miles south of Boston. They arrive at a bank at 8:30 a.m. and sit tight.
Here they come.
They aren't waiting for the bank to open.
All right, guys, lock and load.
The heist is on.
See those hands? Hands up! Hands up! Clock, let's go! Let's go! Give me a key. Let's work on what you know. Give me the key, guys. Run the clock. Let's go! Go, go, go! Go! Let's go! Let's go! Hurry up! Let's go! Gotta get out of here. Put your hands up! Look down. Don't you look at me. Don't you look at him.
They stop a few hundred yards away behind a nearby shopping center.
Hands up! Get out! Get out! Get out! Don't move! Let's go, guys! Come on, let's go! Come on, guys, let's go! Come on, you guys, hurry up, hurry up! Come on, let's go, we're on the clock, let's go! Come on, we're almost there, let's go, let's go!
The men get away with over $1 million. It's one of the largest armored car heists in Massachusetts history. Weymouth police get the call about the robbery and notify the FBI. Police officers and agents respond within minutes. FBI Special Agent Jim Crawford is among the first to arrive at the scene.
I was in that immediate area for unrelated reasons, conducting an investigation. I heard on my radio that there had been a robbery of an armored truck in Weymouth. Upon arriving at the scene, which was just probably a few minutes after the robbery, I proceeded into the parking lot area. I observed several money bags that were left outside on the ground that the robbers did not take with them. That was the most surprising fact that I observed immediately.
While investigators are working the scene, they receive a report of a burning blue van fitting the description of the getaway vehicle. The van is less than a quarter mile from the bank.
There was a vehicle there that had been burning for probably at least 10 minutes, and pretty much it was burned out completely. There was no determination of any vehicle identification number. There was nothing of any evidentiary value found in that vehicle.
At the bank, forensic investigators comb through the front parking lot where the robbery began. They search for anything the robbers might have left behind, but find nothing. Police also process the armored car for clues. Again, they find nothing. The armored car crew tells agents they didn't get a good look at the robbers' faces because they wore masks.
All of them had masks, but I think they were white because I could see one of the eye holes.
The robbers also wore gloves. Forensic techs don't lift a single usable print. What troubles agents most about the heist are the robbers' tactics.
It was very unusual. Gunmen unloaded the vehicle, and they had a countdown. One person was serving as the count. He used a stopwatch. They knew exactly how much time they were going to spend perpetrating the robbery. The professional that they handled the truck, the getaway area where they had burned out the vehicle, very professionally accomplished.
The job is so professional, agents have almost nothing to go on. The only clue investigators have is puzzling.
I believe they left on the ground over $1 million.
These robbers, whoever they are pros. Leaving that much money to stick to a timetable suggests they've done this before.
This was the most disciplined, the most training, the most cautious group that I've been involved in with 30 years in the FBI.
The agents know this is going to be a tough case to crack. This gang is good, and they probably are not working alone.
Usually on this type of professional robbery, it's always looked at the possibility of an inside person. There was nothing to indicate here that was the case. I know the guards had been interviewed during the course of the investigation, but nothing to indicate that they were involved in this robbery.
The precision of the Weymouth heist reminds Agent Crawford of the string of jobs pulled over 25 years ago by a legendary Boston criminal named Richie Harold.
During later part of 1977, I was the case agent on a robbery, the Wells Fargo armored truck that occurred in Braintree, Massachusetts. As a result of that investigation, I developed sources that indicated the primary suspect in that robbery was an individual by the name of Richie Harold.
In the 1960s and 1970s, Richie Harold and his gang were suspected in multiple armored car robberies which were considered to be perfect crimes. Although no fingerprints are found in Weymouth, Agent Crawford feels Richie Harold had something to do with this.
The similarity between the Weymouth armored truck robbery and the Wells Fargo and Braintree were that they were restricted on time on the Wells Fargo robbery, just as the Weymouth one. They were highly professional in their commanding of the vehicle, the armored truck. They left no witnesses behind, nothing of evidentiary value.
But Richie Harold couldn't have pulled off the Weymouth job. He's dead. The Boston area has always been a haven for armored car robbers. Agents know what to do. They hit the streets and start working the usual suspects.
In the 60s and the 70s, Charlestown was kind of infamous to have a lot of young men that were involved in bank robberies and armored truck robberies. Hijackings of trucks, for example, were very prevalent in the 70s there, and then more professionals got involved with the perpetration of armored truck robberies during the 70s, the 80s.
To broaden their reach, the FBI forms a task force with the Massachusetts State Police and Boston Police Department. They cast a wide net, questioning every informant they have.
You're really depending on confidential sources to lead you at least the right direction, people that are involved in this type of activity.
But the informants don't give the investigators anything. The investigation stalls. And agents know, with a gang this good, it is only a matter of time until they strike again. On December 22nd, 1987, Robbers hold up an armored car at a Weymouth, Massachusetts bank and get away with over $1 million. Special Agent Jim Crawford.
They were not foolish at all to go buying large purchases or talking to anyone, and they pretty much operated in secret and were well disciplined to stay away from anybody that might inform on them.
Despite the task force's best efforts, the trail of the Weymouth robbers goes cold. The task force disbands after a year of hard work. Even so, investigators fear they haven't seen the last of the robbers.
I believe that these individuals would strike again. Number one, they were successful. The amounts of money they obtained was very significant. There was no indication to them that they were being closely monitored by the police or the FBI. And it was a matter of time that they were involved in another robbery.
Agents worry they will lose more than money if the robbers strike again.
The individuals that take the task on robbing an armored truck, first of all, go with the idea that they're going to escape and perpetrate this robbery no matter what they have to do. That would include killing police officers.
May 31st, 1989. A year and a half after the Weymouth robbery. At a bank in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, about 60 miles east of Boston. Agents' concerns about violence tragically come true. The robbers take control of the armored car in seconds. Once again, the robbers force the driver to take the armored car around to the back of a shopping center near the bank. It is the exact same MO as the last robbery, only this time they leave very little money behind. Robbing an armored car is more lucrative than a bank heist, according to FBI Special Agent Jim Crawford.
The average bank robbery today, between cameras and bulletproof glass and bait money, it's risky for not a whole lot of money, not substantial sums. If someone wants to spend the time and training on perpetrating an armored truck, the rewards are far greater.
They use a smoke grenade to obscure their escape. As the wounded armored car guard fights for his life, police try to find the men responsible.
Deborah, you saw 3 men come out of here? Yeah, I saw 3 of them.
Officers like Massachusetts State Police Staff Sergeant Richard Rand try to get descriptions of the robbers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some saw the robbery in progress, but as far as identifying the individuals or giving significant information about their identity, they were masked, and there was very little information that was provided that could lead to identifying the suspects.
Police see the robbers torched a getaway vehicle. They know the suspects had to find another way to flee. The most likely escape route, into the woods. But there's a deep stream that would be difficult to cross. Further into the woods, investigators find a makeshift bridge over the water.
They'd gone to the time of preparing their exit so that they could get across the stream and probably not get all that wet, so that they would obviously stand out to other people or law enforcement if they were approached in the short time after the robbery.
Officers follow the path and come out in a residential neighborhood. Across the street, a potential witness. Police learn the man saw something suspicious just a few minutes earlier.
Hello, sir.
He watched 3 men walk out of the woods carrying large sacks. Then a car drove up. He didn't get a good look at the men carrying the bags, but he saw the driver. Police issue an APB for the car with 4 men inside and radio the driver's description. Police dispatch helicopters to search for the vehicle. "40 minutes after the robbery, investigators find the robber's car a few miles from the bank. The robbers torched it to destroy the evidence. But unlike the Weymouth robbery, this time some items inside didn't burn, including a blanket, a bank bag which held money, and an unexploded dye marker designed to go off when thieves opened the money bags. Because the dye marker didn't explode, the robbers must be experienced enough to open the money bags without setting them off. This time, the fire didn't destroy the vehicle identification number.
Well, the VIN plates typically survive these fires, and they're visible through the windshield. And first thing that was done by arriving law enforcement was to run the VIN numbers.
Police learned the car was stolen months earlier in Weymouth, Massachusetts. The FBI finally has evidence that could put them on the robbers' trail. May 31st, 1989. The FBI and local police investigate a violent armored car robbery. The robbers get away with over $800,000. The robbers shot an armored car guard in the back. They left him to die in the bank's parking lot. Paramedics rushed the guard to the hospital. Miraculously, he survived. A few miles away from the bank, investigators found a burned getaway car. They recovered the VIN number and determined it had been reported stolen in Weymouth, Massachusetts, months earlier. Police found another torch vehicle in the rear of the bank. They believe the robbers also burned it as a diversion. But police and the FBI get a break. They find a flare inside that was designed to start the fire. It didn't burn completely. This car was also reported stolen, but its ignition was intact. At this scene, the evidence helps the FBI. But the wounded guard signals that these robbers are becoming more dangerous. Even with the evidence left behind, Massachusetts State Police Staff Sergeant Richard Rand fears these robbers will be tough to catch.
They had a good plan in place to execute the robbery. They had a good plan in place to make their escape. And they had a good plan in place to destroy whatever evidence could possibly be left at the scene for law enforcement to gather against them. So they had done their homework, and they knew the armored car schedule, they knew the bank schedule, they knew everything that they needed to know about how to execute their plan, and it was a very well executed plan.
Agents interview witnesses and learn the robbers used duct tape to seal the gap between their sleeves and gloves, as well as their pants and boots.
These robbers were very sophisticated in that they made sure that they didn't shed any evidence at these scenes.
Investigators find no useful evidence inside the armored car. No bullet casings at the scene. The Fitchburg job is so similar to the robbery in Weymouth 18 months earlier that it catches the attention of FBI Special Agent Jim Crawford.
The similarities between the Fitchburg and the Weymouth robbery were that, number one, they were both professionally done. Both robberies were timed. They knew exactly how much time they were going to spend in the area of the victim truck. They used an incendiary device, both on the getaway vehicles. These people knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they knew how to do it.
But the FBI and local police still know very little about this gang, other than the fact that they are experienced and dangerous. It will take every weapon in the FBI's arsenal to bring them down. Investigators follow up on their best clue left by the Fitchburg robbers, the burned car. They learned the car had been reported stolen from South Boston 6 months earlier. But the vehicle's ignition showed no signs of tampering. Police suspect the robbers may have had a key.
I interviewed the owner. He had stated that he had in fact reported the car stolen, but that he had lent the car to a friend, and that friend had come back to him and said that the car was stolen. He'd parked it somewhere and it had been stolen.
The friend who borrowed the car is named Greg Hicks.
FBI. Speak to him a second, please.
Investigators have reason to suspect Hicks himself in the theft.
We came up with the fact that he had a criminal record for a number of petty crimes and auto theft. And it seemed like he had a substance abuse problem.
Craig, I'm gonna show you a picture.
Investigators pressure Hicks to come clean about what happened to the car.
It wasn't particularly difficult. After some conversation about the severity of the crime, that he'd been using an armored car robbery, somebody been shot, these are serious crimes, and that because he was the last person to have the car, and he could be implicated. He had admitted that the car was not in fact stolen, that he'd borrowed the car, and that he'd given the car to a person, and that he'd gone back to the owner of the car and told him that the car was stolen so that the owner would report it stolen.
Greg Hicks also admits to stealing the sedan used in the Fitchburg robbery. He says he gave both vehicles to a man named Carl Tucker the night before the gang struck the armored car in Fitchburg. Investigators hit the streets again, asking their sources about Carl Tucker. Nobody knows anything. They turned to veteran Boston police detective Martin Coleman.
He was a sleeper. We knew nothing about him. He was doing aluminum siding and replacement windows out of a storefront on Broadway in South Boston. He owned the building, but his hobby was robbing armored cars and getting information about armored cars.
Investigators do not have enough evidence to confront Tucker. There are no eyewitnesses to the crime, and he has made no incriminating statements. All they have is Greg Hicks' claim that he gave stolen vehicles to Tucker. Agents tail him, trying to learn more.
We had confidential sources indicate that the persons responsible for these robberies were hanging out at a lounge in South Boston.
Investigators try to learn the identities of Tucker's associates. At the same bar, they see a known bank robber named Fred Rogan. Rogan has a connection to a robber Crawford knows all too well.
He was an individual that came to my attention back in the 70s. He was suspect in the robbery in Braintree, associated with Richie Harold. I had done surveillances in the 70s and seen Richie Harold meet with him. On one occasion, I believed I observed them surveilling a bank in the area of Quincy, Massachusetts.
If Fred Rogan was involved in the 2 armored car robberies, It would explain how the robbers could pull off such an elaborate job. Almost 2 years after the Weymouth heist and 2 months after the Fitchburg robbery, agents finally have suspects. The question is whether agents can bring down this dangerous gang before it is too late. 2 armored car heists 16 months apart net a gang of robbers over $1.8 million.
Got it? Get in there, go.
On the first job, on December 22nd, 1987, the gang left no evidence behind and took over $1 million. It is one of the largest heists in New England history. The second heist didn't net as large a take, but the robbers made an uncharacteristic mistake. They failed to completely torch a getaway car. A VIN number on the vehicle led them to a man named Carl Tucker.
Damn stuff.
Tucker hangs out at bars frequented by Fred Rogan, the protege of a dangerous but now dead armored car robber named Richie Harold. While agents know quite a bit about Fred Rogan, they know very little about Carl Tucker. Investigators hit Boston's streets to ask contacts in the city's criminal underworld for background on Tucker and any associates he might have. Boston Police Department Detective Martin Coleman is part of the FBI task force investigating the robberies.
We had a pretty good idea who was capable of doing these armored car robberies. And it was, as the saying goes, round up the usual suspects, and that's exactly who we started to look at.
One of the usual suspects is convicted thief Steve Farrell, who just got out of prison weeks earlier. He couldn't have been part of these robberies, but he might know the men who were.
He had committed armored car robberies himself. As an employee of one of the armored car companies, he drove off with the truck one day.
It isn't long before Farrell gives investigators a big break.
I said, do you have any ideas of who the armored car crew is out doing these armored cars?
Farrell automatically states that Carl Tucker is probably involved.
And I was shocked that I hadn't even mentioned the fact to him that he had ordered the stolen cars. I set up a meeting with him and Special Agent Crawford in a Chinese restaurant in the middle of Chinatown.
We operated, I should say, with the source on a very confidential basis. There were only 2 people that knew that basically he existed during the course of this investigation. That was myself for months and months and Detective Coleman, because we were concerned not only for his safety, but any possible, because these people had contacts with different police authorities.
He's a low person. He's into everything.
Steve Farrell explains he knows Carl Tucker fairly well as an acquaintance in Boston's criminal underworld, but they have never worked together on a job. He says Tucker is known on the streets as the King, and that he uses a legitimate business to launder dirty money from robberies.
I know his ins and outs.
Farrell's help is a huge break for the investigation. His information is solid, and he wants to help shut this gang down. He volunteers to work as an FBI informant to gather more information on Carl Tucker.
I don't know how much longer I've got.
Farrell explains he's in failing health because of a heart condition and wants to make up for his criminal past before it's too late.
The source wanted to show his children that he had moral fiber. He wasn't just a criminal. And to prove it, this was his way of proving that he could do something. He wanted to prove that he wasn't the person that his kids thought he was.
Investigators are concerned for Farrell's safety and caution him that he'll have to enter a witness relocation program once the investigation is complete. Farrell is still willing to put his life on the line. It isn't long before Farrell establishes contact with Carl Tucker.
Hey, man, what you doing?
All right.
All right.
Doing all right.
Hey, buddy.
They were both aware of each other's backgrounds. They both, streetwise, trusted each other.
Might have some work
But trust in Boston's criminal underworld only goes so far. Tucker is slow to talk.
Hey,
He always played it cool, never told him he was in the armored car business, never mentioned any other members of the gang. And this went on for quite a while.
Looking for it?
Hey, might have something for you.
Farrell hints that he needs work, hoping Carl Tucker will bring him into the gang. But Tucker is too cautious to take the bait.
Nothing changed with time.
We were getting nowhere. And finally we said to the source, why don't you tell him that you have a relative that's in the armored car driving as a driver?
Tucker is intrigued.
Can you give me one of those?
He asks Farrell if he could use his contacts at the armored car company to obtain what is known as a trip ticket.
That'll help us out a
A
lot.
trip ticket would provide valuable secret information to a professional armored car robber.
You're not giving them the key to the armored car, but you're giving them the location where the armored car would be, at what hour, and what kind of money it would have.
The trip ticket was so valuable to the robbers, again, because any professional that believes he has inside information, it's like having inside information on a race or a lottery.
Farrell offers to do his best to get the trip tickets. The FBI agents on the case win approval from the U.S. Attorney's Office to furnish Farrell with trip tickets to give to Carl Tucker.
It was kind of one of those things you had to really think long and hard and willing to be very dedicated. Once you gave this, it was your responsibility to make sure that that armored car started its route and finished its route without being robbed at some other location.
The tickets are for an armored car's Tuesday routes. The handoff goes down. The FBI has set the trap. Now all they can do is watch and see if Tucker takes the bait.
Everything good?
That's great, thank you.
You know how tough it was to get.
In order to solve a series of violent armored car robberies, the FBI hands a known criminal specific information for an armored car's Tuesday route. It is a big risk, but one they have to take if their informant Steve Farrell is ever to win the trust of the FBI's prime suspect, Carl Tucker. The plan works. With the gift of the trip tickets, Farrell gains Tucker's confidence.
Everything good?
That's great, thank you.
FBI technicians install a listening device in Steve Farrell's car to capture the increasingly open conversations Carl Tucker is having with the undercover source.
I'd have to say on this source that he was a natural. Always got direction from the FBI, things that you would want to say, basically not to entrap, that type of instruction, the legal instruction, but he knew the street as well as any seasoned FBI agent.
We only take a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time.
Carl Tucker begins to open up about his criminal enterprise with Farrell.
You splitting it up even?
Pretty much.
But he is always vague about the exact details of future jobs. Surveillance efforts slowly reveal the identities of Tucker's associates, men the FBI know all about. Men like James Murphy.
Jimmy Murphy always claimed he wrote the book on armored cars. He always liked to brag that he was the best armored car robber in the country.
Another associate is Michael Habich.
Well, Michael Habich was a career criminal. He's been in prison most of his life. He always carrying a gun, a violent criminal, also an armored car robber.
Investigators know Fred Rogan is an old pro.
He had a history of bank robbery and armored car robberies. He was one of the usual suspects and lived within 200 or 300 yards of the Weymouth armored car robbery.
We don't get greedy.
Right.
Farrell takes it all in,
Do our homework.
and so does the FBI.
Yeah, things are good.
Low key.
Low key.
Agents obtained the trip tickets from an armored car company that agreed to assist in the investigation. An armored car crew volunteers to help the task force. Agents warn the guards that a gang of armored car robbers will have trip tickets for their Tuesday routes. The agents assure the guards that they will not be alone.
Bad guys have trip tickets.
We'd placed an FBI agent in the armored truck, the potential victim truck, who was there basically to safeguard the guards, to be there in case something went wrong, to be there in the event that something happened earlier than we anticipated.
We just don't know when.
A team of investigators and agents will also tail the armored car.
Safe. So if it happens.
Over the next few months, agents observe the suspects shadowing the armored car.
They looked at the truck every Tuesday, and they timed it, what time it arrived and what time it left. And they knew exactly, same guards all the time. It was very interesting to watch them and not get caught ourselves.
Agents can never be sure whether any given Tuesday will be a dry run or the day the robbers strike. It adds up to a lot of long hours.
Every Tuesday for months, we started at 4 in the morning and didn't get through until the armored car left. And then we followed the armored car for the rest of its route to make sure that they weren't still following and going to take them down in another location.
June 1990, in Methuen, Massachusetts. FBI agents and an assault team watch what starts out as another dry run. Then, the suspects start to make their move.
Go, go, go!
June 1990, in Methuen, Massachusetts. An FBI task force watches a gang of dangerous armored car robbers. The gang spends months shadowing an armored car. An FBI task force believes the men got away with 2 robberies, one in 1987 and one in 1989, that netted them almost $2 million. Agents can never be sure if the suspects are rehearsing an upcoming robbery or if it's the real thing. At the bank in Methuen, the gang makes its move.
One of the vehicles they were driving made an overt move towards the armored truck.
Go, go, go!
Based on that, one of the surveillance vehicles followed just for safety purposes.
But the FBI task force and Special Agent Jim Crawford discover it's just another dress rehearsal. Being safe comes with a price.
Stand down, stand down.
Their prime suspect, Carl Tucker, could discover he's being watched.
Do a lot of homework too.
The FBI has an informant, an ex-con named Steve Farrell, who has earned Carl Tucker's confidence. Through listening devices installed in Farrell's car, agents learn that Tucker was spooked by the Methuen experience.
he indicated that he believed that this could possibly be a setup. And our source was reprimanded, did you tell anybody about the activities of this location? Based on that discussion, our source backed off and said, who's to say somebody else didn't mention something?
Farrell tells Tucker that they can't work together if they don't trust each other.
Yeah, you're right. Procedures they have to follow. Right?
Tucker calms down and later tells Farrell that he and his crew will shift the robbery target to a bank in Abington, Massachusetts. The trip tickets the robbers are working with give precise times when the armored car arrives and leaves Abington, and the amount of cash on board.
When they targeted the Abington, it was believed they approximately had $2 million in that truck on a given run.
Over the next several months, the FBI task force watches Tucker and his men stalk the armored car as it delivers money to Abington. The long hours every Tuesday takes a toll on investigators and resources.
There was lots of pressure to get this done because every Tuesday, half the office in Boston was out on this case. The surveillance team, the SWAT team, the airplane, everyone was working.
Agents are concerned about the expense and fatigue caused by shadowing the robbers. So they instruct their source to tell Carl Tucker that the Abington Bank is closing its branch, and that on January 9th, the armored car will remove a vast amount of cash.
We held that carrot out. It was a solid gold carrot. The bank was closing. It's time to do it.
Go ahead. It was over here. Which one? It's going to go down tomorrow. And that's the day they're going to do a dry
Agents learn that Carl Tucker is planning a dry run on January 9th, 1991. This could be the dry run that turns into a robbery. Agents surveil members of Tucker's gang in the early hours of January 9th. They notice pre-dawn activity that suggests the gang is up to more than a dry run.
They were seen carrying what were believed to be bags containing weapons, the way they were being handled. We strongly believed then that they were going to possibly make a move and attempt to perpetrate this robbery.
The suspects arrive hours before the armored car is scheduled to show up. They stake out the location. They don't know they are not alone. The FBI task force is there. Agents quickly identify multiple vehicles containing suspects, including a van. The FBI assault team is prepared for a robbery attempt when the armored car arrives.
Get out, we're going to take them down quick.
There was high risk involved basically on apprehending these people. We believed they would be armed based on prior history.
But by 10:30 a.m., the armored car still has not shown up. It's running behind schedule, unusual in the armored car business. Both the robbers and law enforcement are on edge. Then, the robbers discover the surveillance effort and attempt to flee. Agents decide to take them down. The task force converges on all the suspects' cars at once. The agents know they are inside, but they don't know if the men are armed. They proceed with caution.
Let me see your hands. Let me see your hands. Get your hands up. Get your hands up. Come on out. Come on out. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around.
Carl Tucker is taken into custody, along with two men from Ireland named Michael McNaught and Stephen Fitzpatrick. The old pro Fred Rogan had been standing guard outside a van.
Stop. Hold it right there.
He tries to walk away by acting like a bank customer. But the ruse doesn't work. Inside the robbers' vehicles, investigators find several items that prove Abington was definitely not a dry run. Ski masks, police scanners, smoke grenades. The van had enough items to start a small war. The armored car finally arrives nearly a half hour behind schedule. Agents asked the driver why the armored car was so late.
We got stopped for speeding by the state police, he said. And then, what did you say to the trooper? We told him we were on our way to get robbed. And FBI was waiting for us. The trooper didn't believe them and gave them the ticket.
In the end, all of the participants in the attempted armored car robbery in Abington were convicted. Michael Habich was sentenced to 19 years. The oldest of the group, Fred Rogan, got 10.5 years. As did the Irishmen Michael McNaught and Stephen Fitzpatrick. Carl Tucker received 19 years. James Murphy was the only suspect tied to the Fitchburg robbery. A witness saw him behind the wheel of the getaway car. Murphy fought his charges and received a 65-year sentence.
They were all criminals to the core. They lived a life of crime, and they were all repeat offenders, and they never got out of the business. And I assume that they're out of it now because there have been no more armored car robberies.
The FBI's chief source, Steve Farrell, provided damning testimony that helped convict the robbers.
I was with the prosecutors during the trial. The source's life was threatened by one of the suspects, then threatened his life in my presence.
Because of the threats against him, Steve Farrell went into the witness protection program. He died a few years later, knowing he had at least in part made up for his criminal past.
I would say with the source involved in this case, redeem himself, I would agree. He risked his life.
FBI investigators were never able to charge anyone with the Weymouth robbery. But if the Abington robbers perpetrated the job, it was a crime that came with a steep price. Each of them will spend at least a decade in prison. A bank is robbed. There are no witnesses. Its president is missing without a trace. When a body surfaced, the criminal investigation grew deadly serious. Federal agents descended upon a small town that found itself gripped by fear.
When the small community of Noel, Missouri discovered their bank was robbed, they were shocked. When the bank president turned up missing, they were outraged. But things aren't always as they first appear. And when clues began to surface, the facts were more terrible than anyone could have guessed. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. For federal agents, the Noel bank robbery became an intricate case in modern forensics and dogged determination.
The Cowskin Bridge over Grand Lake, Oklahoma, just after 3 a.m. The The lake is popular for fishing and boating. But on this night, it would be the scene of something far more sinister. A gruesome crime, meticulously planned and executed. A cold-blooded murder that would shatter the tranquility of the nearby town of Noel, Missouri.
No! No! No!
Tucked away in the southwest corner of Missouri and home to about 1,200 residents, Noel is a community proud of its small-town charms and low crime rate. On the morning of October 6, 1989, Pauline Coonrod headed off to work at the State Bank of Noel. The cashier's first task upon arriving was to unlock the front doors. But Coonrod found the doors already open. She thought perhaps the bank president, Dan Short, had arrived early. But as she walked through the building, she saw no one. Within moments, Coonrod realized the vault had been robbed. Noel police and a McDonald County, Missouri sheriff responded to Coonrod's 911 call. The FBI was also called in since the bank was insured by the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. An agent was sent to investigate from the nearby Joplin, Missouri office. The entire scene was meticulously photographed and dusted for prints. The agent noticed that the security camera had been spray painted and shot out. Spent casings found below the camera indicated that the robbers used a .45 caliber handgun. Investigators discovered that the thieves had made off with over $71,000, including 320 pounds of quarters, dimes, and nickels. Strangely, more than $100,000 in bills was left behind in an unlocked drawer. Bank President Dan Short was one of 4 bank employees with access to the vault and its time lock. Yet he was the only one of the 4 who hadn't arrived that morning. Questioning him became essential to the investigation. Bank Vice President Mark Allman told investigators that Short intended to work late the night before.
The time lock on the vault hadn't been set the night that the robbery occurred. Dan had came in was in the habit of working later in the evenings, different times during the week, but that particular night he'd put it on standby so that he could come back at a later time and open the vault manually.
Agents wondered if Dan Short had in fact returned to the bank that evening. The sheriff drove to Short's house in Arkansas, near the Missouri border. But no one was home, and his red pickup truck was gone. Short's absence alarmed investigators. They couldn't help but wonder what role the banker played in the robbery. Within hours, word of the crime spread throughout the scandalized community.
Noel's a small town. Main industries, poultry processing plants, some small shops, local merchants, quiet town, tourism in the summertime with the rivers, that sort of thing. But basically just your average small town.
Crimes like this did not happen here. Reports of the heist and the missing bank president filled Noel news broadcasts. Investigators received many calls from the community offering help. One call from an employee at Sibley Manufacturing just outside of town gave investigators their first break.
Hey, listen, come in this morning. I see this truck.
He reported a red pickup truck abandoned in the factory parking lot. The truck was registered to Dan Short. Investigators found coin wrappers strewn across the truck bed. The truck was dusted for fingerprints, but only Short's were identified. The discovery of the truck gave case agent and 19-year FBI veteran Liddell Farley a couple of scenarios to pursue.
At the end of the first day, we weren't sure if we were dealing with an abducted banker or whether the banker, Mr. Short, had absconded with the money. Stops were being placed with his credit card. Airports were being canvassed. Rental car agencies were being checked to see if he perhaps had leased a car. But primarily we're looking for his body, either alive or dead, in the immediate area of Noel.
With Short still missing, investigators secured a search warrant for the bank president's house, hoping to find something that would lead to his whereabouts.
State police, anybody home? Mr. Short.
Inside, all was quiet.
Trooper, look here a minute.
In the kitchen, they discovered an overturned trash can, suggesting perhaps a struggle. They searched every room.
Hi, come here a minute.
By the bed, they found Short's glasses on the nightstand. He never went anywhere without them.
Let's get some light on in here. See, I think that's just.
It appeared that the banker had left in a hurry.
I'd say he cleared. Yeah.
Still, it was impossible to determine from the search whether he had fled or was abducted. With no sign of Short, agents canvassed his neighborhood, hoping for a lead. One neighbor, Carol Dryden, recalled seeing several vehicles pulling into Short's driveway the night of the robbery. Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Jones was involved early in the investigation. According to Jones, Dryden's statement was critical.
Around 2 o'clock in the morning, which really gave us the first time frame, she saw lights going into Dan Shart's property, headlights, and then about 15 or 20 minutes later going out of Dan Shart's driveway.
But the neighbor's statement didn't put the FBI any closer to finding Short. McDonald County Sheriff Don Schlesman was a lead investigator in the case and coordinated the massive search for the banker in the area surrounding Noel.
We set up a command post on the west side of Noel. The groups were split up, giving roads to walk down. Highway Patrol had their helicopter down. We had airplanes. Just mainly did a search from the air and ground.
Beginning from the location where Short's truck was found, search teams proceeded outwards in concentric circles, hoping to find a trace of Short in the immediate vicinity. 5 days after the crime, there was still no trace of the bank president. As the hunt expanded, Farley and 22 agents from the Kansas City office formed a task force with local law enforcement. To house the large number of personnel, the FBI set up headquarters at the local armory. While they unpacked, leads came pouring in from concerned residents. One tip came from local truck driver Buddy Mills. Having heard about the heist, Mills told an agent about what he saw on a road in Noel the morning of the robbery. Returning home from work at about 3 a.m., he encountered 3 vehicles leaving town. One truck matched the description of Short's red pickup. It headed off with a 2-tone van. The other dark-colored truck followed Mills for a while until it turned down a road toward neighboring Arkansas. This information jibed with Carol Dryden's recollection of the traffic outside of Short's house at 2 a.m. Mills' account reinforced the time frame for the crime. Farley met with the bank president's ex-wife, Joyce, who had been married to Short for 25 years. Although they had recently separated, Joyce stressed he was a loving father to their two children.
do is just chat with you a little bit about your husband.
Having worked closely with him at the bank for several years, she never witnessed any impropriety. Yet Short was the FBI's only suspect right now, and after several days of searching, he was still missing. On October 11th, a couple fishing in Grand Lake, just over the state line in Oklahoma, hunted for a good spot to drop a line. They motored to a favorite shady spot. Hoping to hook some bass, they sighted what looked like a clump of seaweed floating on the water. Moving closer, they made a gruesome discovery. Just under the surface, they saw the head and arms of a submerged body. 5 days after the robbery of the State Bank of Noel, Missouri, a dead body surfaced. 2 employees of the marina towed it to a dock. The body was badly decomposed, but the coroner determined that the man had been dead for 5 days. Immediately after death, bacteria begin to break down the soft tissues of the organs, releasing gaseous compounds. After a few days, the gas fills the corpse and can lift the submerged body to the surface. Sheriff Don Schlesman recalled the bloated remains lifted additional weight from the bottom of the lake.
He had the chain tied to him in a concrete block and part of a chair. And it was a pretty gruesome sight, really.
A corpse will float until the skin tears, releasing the gases. Then the body will sink back to the bottom. If the boaters hadn't seen the body that day, it may have never been found. The time of death was later determined to be consistent with the time frame of Dan Short's disappearance. The sheriff found a wallet in the victim's back pocket. Inside was a driver's license confirming the identity as Dan Short. The sheriff contacted the FBI. The search for 51-year-old Dan Short was over, and a homicide investigation had begun.
With his surfacing, which was almost in defiance of the people who had murdered him, it gave us the knowledge of what had happened, and it gave us the focus that we needed in the investigation to direct resources thereafter.
Farley and his partner Larry Nolan rushed to the lake to conduct their own review of the body. Special Agent Nolan's first task was to preserve the evidence.
Collectively, the decision was made to release Mr. Short from the chair, at which time I released him and preserved the concrete block and the chain hoist, the chair, and also the duct tape.
Okay, guys, that's undone.
With Short's corpse freed from his death trap, the coroner removed the body. The medical examiner determined the probable cause of death was drowning. The chair with the block, chain hoist, and duct tape were examined and photographed by investigators before being sent to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. The task force set up a hotline and published pictures of the chair to alert the public, hoping someone would come forward with information.
It was clear from examining the chair and the apparatus, so to speak, that was attached to it, and the location of Mr. Short's body, that he had died a horrible death. All indications are that he was conscious when he was dropped from the bridge, some 30 feet to the water.
The hotline was inundated with calls, helping build a file of more than 80 suspects. According to Sheriff Don Schlesman, one promising tip came from an anonymous caller who urged investigators to question 2 brothers, Joe and Shannon Agofsky.
The Joplin Police Department dispatch received an anonymous call from someone that said the Agoskis had a lot of change in their possession. And a lot of change was what was taken from the bank.
The FBI tracked down 23-year-old Joe Agofsky at a junkyard just south of Noel. The manager pointed agents to where Joe worked on his car.
Yeah, sure. He's working right out there in that yard right there. Oh, that's him right there in the black vest? Yeah. Okay, thank you. How you doing? You Joe Agofsky? Yes, sir.
Joe said that on the night of the robbery, he had been at his girlfriend's house, more than 40 miles from Noel.
Is she available, and does she live locally here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good.
We're also interested in 45 handguns. Do you have that?
He was cooperative and told them he had two .45 caliber handguns,
Could we see it?
the same caliber as the weapon used to shoot out the security camera. They inquired if they could test fire the guns. Joe agreed and told investigators the weapons were stored at his home. His 18-year-old brother Shannon would be there to meet them.
And your brothers? Is this?
When the agents arrived, Shannon Agofsky showed them where the guns were kept. Shannon told investigators that on the night of the murder, he was at his mother's house, where he was still living at the time of the crime.
All right. It's going to be all right if we take these downtown?
After firing both guns, agents sent the shell casings to the FBI lab. Examiners there would later determine that they did not match those found at the bank. To lead agent Farley, it was a dead end.
Both expressed their willingness to help the investigation if they could. Both had alibis for the evening of the crime. Given these factors, our attention was directed elsewhere with other suspects, as both the Agofsky brothers appeared to be not involved in this crime.
Back at Grand Lake in Oklahoma, where Short's body had been recovered 2 days earlier, resident Rowdy Foreman was out fishing with his son and daughter when he made a curious discovery along the shore.
We came across a wooden dowel, a brace, if you want to call it that, and it was just out of place.
Alongside the chair part, Foreman also found a piece of duct tape. Having seen pictures in the newspaper, he believed it may have been from the chair found with Short's body. He sent his son to fetch plastic bags from his house in order to preserve his find. Sheriff Don Schlesman and a partner drove to Oklahoma to question Foreman about the discovery.
And they asked me, do you have a piece of evidence? I told them, I don't know if it's evidence. I said, I found a piece of duct tape. And his first comment was, oh my God, isn't that pretty? And they were looking at the fingerprint, just clear as day. There was a print there.
The fingerprint appeared to be made from car grease, impervious to the lake water. But investigators still had to prove the tape was used in the crime.
Although the tape contained fingerprints, that piece of evidence was not relevant unless it could be proven to be part of the chair or the apparatus in which Mr. Short was drowned.
To prove that, FBI examiners would have to match the glue and strands from the torn piece of tape with the tape found on the chair. But that would take weeks. Until then, the FBI and local investigators still had no prime suspects for the crime. A week after the robbery of the State Bank of Noel, Missouri, and the brutal murder of its president, Dan Short, the FBI had recovered Short's body, the murder device, and a possible fingerprint from a nearby lake. Investigators fielded calls from residents who were willing to help, but also afraid to do so.
Due to the manner in which Mr. Short was killed, although the local citizens were very concerned and wanted to be helpful, some were reluctant to do so out of fear. Therefore, some of the witnesses did not come forth. They did so sometimes out of the insistence of a friend or an associate.
Farley received one such call from a man who claimed his friend might have information about the chain hoist wrapped around the chair that drowned Dan Short. The friend's name was Wayne Boutain. Boutain owned the chain hoist, which had recently been stolen. Though he notified the police, the hoist was never recovered. He suspected the Agofskis of stealing it. Farley showed Boutain the photos of the hoist investigators had retrieved from the lake. Boutain identified it as his own. He recognized damage on the pulley. He'd last seen the apparatus at Sheila Agofski's house where he had once lived. Boutain agreed to take a polygraph test and passed it.
Another important development in the case was the determination that the chain hoist, which was duct taped to the chair, was property of Wayne Boutain, who had left it at the residence of Sheila Agofsky a few days before the murder of Mr. Short.
On the strength of Boutain's statement, Farley decided to question the Agofskis again. Driving up to their mother's house, he noticed an old van in the front yard. It closely matched the description of one of the vehicles Buddy Mills saw the night of the bank heist.
Can I help you with anything?
Yes, ma'am.
Farley questioned Sheila about the missing chain hoist, but she claimed to have no memory of it. She also corroborated Shannon's alibi, saying he was at her house the night of the murder.
I don't know anything about it. I have no idea.
Okay.
I can't help you with anything.
I appreciate your time. We'll be back in touch.
Farley left with suspicions that she knew more than she was telling. He asked the brothers to give their fingerprints, hoping to match the one found on the duct tape. Joe Agofsky complied. When asked about the hoist, he told Farley he remembered seeing it at his mother's house, yet he didn't know what became of it. A few days later, Farley returned to Sheila Agofsky's.
I'm Special Agent Farley.
There he found Shannon with a friend by the name of Gant Sanders. Having secured Joe's fingerprints, Farley tried to convince Shannon to give his as well.
Set of his fingerprints. It'd make things a lot easier. Possibly get you out of some trouble.
Joe Agofsky was very cooperative and produced his fingerprints upon request without hesitation, while Shannon was evasive and hesitant to.
Gant Sanders watched cautiously. Shannon echoed his mother's story, proclaiming he had no knowledge of the chain hoist.
I'll be seeing you guys later.
He eventually promised Farley he'd come down to the police station to give his prints, but he never showed. Although Farley had initially dismissed the Agofskis as suspects, he took note that Shannon and Joe's memories of the chain hoist were conflicting. Now, he decided to take a closer look into their background. Researching the family's financial records, Farley discovered that 9 years earlier they had received money from an insurance settlement after their father died in a plane crash. Popular opinion was that their money was still plentiful, making them unlikely candidates for bank robbers. But Farley learned that wasn't so.
While they had all received a considerable sum of money, as of that time, Joe had spent his. Their mother had spent a large portion of hers, and Shannon Agofsky had a considerable amount of money still in a fund, but it was not available to him at that time until he was 21.
Agents found that both brothers had recently purchased cars with cash, yet neither had jobs. Investigators also determined that 18-year-old Shannon had spent more than $5,000 since the heist. Although the Agofsky brothers' spending looked suspicious, Farley still had no solid evidence linking them to the bank robbery and murder. Revisiting crime reports and witness statements, he made a new connection. Truck driver Buddy Mills said he had seen 3 vehicles leaving Noel on the night of the robbery. That meant there was a possible third suspect out there. If 2 of the vehicles were driven by the Agofsky brothers, then perhaps the other was driven by one of their friends. Farley recalled the young man he met briefly on the Agofsky's porch the day he questioned Shannon, Gant Sanders. Sanders had recently become Shannon's roommate. Farley tracked him down at a junkyard.
The closest associate that we could identify of both Shannon and Joe Agofsky was Gant Sanders. It was learned that Gant had been good friends with both Joe and Shannon, both prior to and after the robbery and murder.
But Sanders said he knew nothing about the robbery and murder, although he offered no alibi for the night in question. Farley decided to question Shannon again, this time with a polygraph machine.
A couple of things about the test is nothing will be painful.
The test was administered in a motel room by a technician from the Missouri capital of Springfield. A polygraph is used by investigators as a tool to rule out possible suspects. The machine monitors the subject's reactions to stress in 3 ways. Tubes fastened around the chest monitor the slightest change in respiration. Low-voltage electrodes placed on the finger detect moisture on the skin.
All right, relax your arms.
And a cuff on the arm measures changes in blood pressure. The examination is based on the body's fight or flight principle.
I'll need you to sit perfectly still.
When the brain perceives a physical or psychological threat, the body responds by increasing blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration. Shannon Agofsky was asked about Dan Short, the robbery, and the murder.
Did you take a chain hoist from Wayne Butane's?
No.
Did you kill Dan Short?
No.
Based on his physiological responses, the examiner determined that the younger Agofsky brother was deceptive about his knowledge of the crime. It was clear to Farley that Shannon was somehow involved.
You do.
But he'd need more convincing evidence to bring charges.
Figure out what's best for yourself.
In December 1989, the Agofskys were subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury to answer questions under oath. Each family member gave testimony separately. Shannon, Joe, and Sheila each disavowed any knowledge of the bank robbery and the murder of Dan Short. After questioning, Shannon was once again asked to supply his fingerprints voluntarily.
Can you tell me where these are?
Again, he agreed and set an appointment. In Washington, D.C., FBI analysts continued to examine the items sent to them by the agents in Noel, trying to match the chair part and tape retrieved by Foreman to the chair and tape that had been bound to Dan Short. An examiner confirmed that the wood found by Rowdy Foreman was part of the same chair that Dan Short was taped to. The piece of tape with the fingerprint on it was the most promising piece of evidence. But did it match the tape used on the chair and body? It did. Examiners were conclusively able to link these portions of tape by matching the torn ends, the fibers, and the glue. The tape found by Foreman had 2 complete prints on it. They compared the prints to Joe Agofsky's, but they did not match. Farley recalled this finding was not all bad news.
The fingerprint examiner notified me that the prints on the tape were similar to that of Joe Agofsky, but not identical. And he advised me that the fingerprints of siblings were often similar in pattern. Therefore, getting the fingerprints of Shannon Agofsky was imperative.
Although he told the grand jury he would provide his fingerprints, Shannon never did. But this time, Farley would force Shannon to comply by serving him with a subpoena. Grudgingly, Shannon Agofsky gave his prints to the FBI almost 5 months after the heist and murder. Since comparing his prints to those found on the tape would take several weeks, Shannon was free to go. But Agent Farley did not remain idle. He knew that Gant Sanders was close to both brothers and probably knew more about the crime than he had said. So he decided to confront him. He told Sanders that if he was innocent and had knowledge of the crime, he should cooperate with the investigation. But if Sanders was knowingly protecting the Agofskys and they were convicted of the robbery and murder, Sanders would be jailed for aiding and abetting. Worse, without a solid alibi, he was still under suspicion of the crime. But Sanders revealed nothing. He remained faithful to the brothers. Farley thought that perhaps Sanders was hiding his guilt with his silence. Agent Farley pursued two brothers, Joe and Shannon Agofsky, as the prime suspects in the bank heist and murder. Joe's fingerprints had been compared to the two found on the duct tape from the murder device. His did not match. As investigators waited for results on a comparison with Shannon's, additional partial prints were discovered on the tape. Now the FBI needed new prints from Shannon, a 360-degree view to match the partial prints on the duct tape. But Shannon was nowhere to be found. Farley hoped that he could get to Shannon through one of the Agofsky brothers' friends, Gant Sanders. The agent also suspected Sanders could be the unidentified accomplice. But cooperating with the FBI would mean betraying his longtime friends. Finally, in June of 1990, hoping to clear his name, he contacted Farley, wanting to talk. Investigators told Sanders they thought that he had helped commit the bank robbery and murder in Noel with the Agofsky brothers. But Sanders claimed he had nothing to do with the crime. However, he did admit to his involvement in another, more recent incident. On one particular evening in late December 1989, Shannon and Joe Agofsky broke into a house in Missouri and stole several rifles. The brothers rendezvoused with Sanders later that evening, setting the second part of their plan into action. The next day, Sanders and Shannon drove across the state line into Arkansas and sold the guns. It was a federal violation. Sanders recalled another time when the brothers tried to convince him to participate in another, more violent crime just months after Dan Short's murder. Sheriff Don Schlesman recalled how the Agofskys tried to recruit Sanders.
And they told him, we're not doing any more Mickey Mouse stuff. We're going to go hit a place, and there's probably going to be some shooting, because they got armed guards. And if you don't really want to kill somebody, you'd probably better let us know so we can take you back home. And so Gant told him he didn't really think he wanted to be involved in something like that, so they turned around and did take him home.
By cooperating with the FBI, Sanders made a deal for his role in the illegal sale of the firearms and was put on probation. He was also finally dismissed as a third suspect in the bank robbery, passing a lie detector test 3 times. With the help of Sanders' statement, Farley issued a federal warrant for Shannon Agofsky. He was indicted for transporting and selling firearms across state lines. Since Joe had not been involved in the sale, he was not charged. Authorities tracked down Shannon in a small town in Arkansas several months later. When apprehended, police searched his vehicle and found several bags of nickels in his trunk. Shannon was turned over to authorities in Missouri and booked in the Springfield Federal Courthouse.
Look at me.
While being processed, Farley acquired the set of Shannon's fingerprints examiners had been waiting for. The FBI lab needed a front and back view of his prints, hoping to match 2 partial prints found on the duct tape used in the murder of Dan Short. But his older brother Joe was still free, and Farley had little evidence to tie him to the crimes. Investigators knew the brothers remained in contact while Shannon was behind bars. Since all prison conversations were recorded, agents got a glimpse into the Agofsky's family relationship. Shannon made a number of calls to his mother and Joe. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Jones, one call was particularly incriminating.
Shannon was asking Joe if we would be able to make a case against him, and Joe indicated that we would not be able to put him at the scene.
Farley knew the brothers were worried, but the call was not enough to arrest Joe. Then, just days later, he finally received the results from the lab.
Those fingerprints turned out to be the fingerprints of Shannon Agofsky. The tape was determined to have come from the chair in which Mr. Short was bound to. Therefore, that piece of tape became a most important piece of evidence in this case.
Mike Jones now had a strong case against Shannon.
We knew we were going to prosecute Shannon once we got those first 2 fingerprints, and then the main focus was on Joe, trying to get a case built against Joe.
How's it going?
Finding evidence against Joe was a thorny task. Nothing directly linked him to the crime. Once again, Farley combed through financial records to see how much Joe had spent.
We attempted to determine all his cash transactions and did determine that he had spent some $19,000 in cash during the 16 months following the robbery. During that time, he was unemployed and had no logical explanation for having that much cash.
Scrutinizing Joe's phone records, Farley made another important find. Joe had made several long-distance calls to his girlfriend at her home during the very days leading up to and after the robbery.
Yeah.
The calls destroyed his alibi. Joe had stated that he was staying with her the entire time.
Not too smart.
They called Sanders in for additional questioning, hoping he could shed more light on Joe's involvement. Sanders told the agents about a conversation he had with both Agofsky brothers. That incident took place in Sammy Skaggs' junkyard.
The 3 of them were working on one of the cars, and Sammy Skaggs announced that the banker from Joplin was here to pick up his car. And that apparently generated a comment from, I believe it was Joe, that what the 3 of them ought to do was to follow a banker, follow him home, grab him, kidnap him, and force him to take him to the bank and open the vault.
At the time, Sanders agreed that it might be an easy way to get rich. The plan sounded eerily like what could have happened to Dan Short. It was now clear to the FBI that the brothers had the knowledge, motive, and opportunity to pull off the homicide and heist. Based on accumulating evidence, Joe Agofsky was arrested more than 2 years after the horrifying crime. Both brothers were indicted on 3 federal counts relating to the bank robbery and murder. But would the evidence be strong enough to convict the 2 brothers? The investigators were betting on it. Almost 3 years after a bank heist and brutal murder, FBI agent Liddell Farley handed prosecutors all the evidence the task force had amassed. Reviewing their files, the agents described the Agofskys' plans and actions to Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Jones and his associates. They were determined to prove beyond any doubt that the brothers had committed the crime. The FBI had learned that Joe Agofsky, needing information about the state bank's floor plan, had opened a safe deposit box a few weeks before the crime. Bank Vice President Mark Ullman told investigators that Joe was particularly interested in Dan Short as well. He made a point of asking who Short was and where he lived.
He's our president. Would you like to meet him?
Oh, no, thanks. I was just asking who he was.
Returning home, Joe drew floor plans to the bank and plotted the crime with Shannon. They decided to do the job before the sun rose, so there would be no witnesses.
We're gonna get through the front door. When we get through there, I want you guys to knock the cameras out.
To get into the vault, they needed someone who had the keys and knew the combination.
Make sure get them keys.
For that, they would abduct Dan Short, the bank president, and force him to open the vault. Afterwards, they needed to make sure he'd never talk.
Short, don't give that combination up.
They thought it would be easy money. Life would be good with their new fortunes.
Let's get these guns clean.
In the early hours of October 6th, Joe and Shannon Agofsky put their plan into motion. Acting as a lookout for them was an unidentified accomplice who drove the blue Chevy pickup. It was the same vehicle neighbor Carol Dryden recalled seeing around Short's house a week before the kidnapping. The brothers loaded their mother's brown and tan van with the equipment they would need to commit the crime. At around 2 a.m., they arrived at Dan Short's house, a brief trip across the Arkansas border. Eventually, he awoke from a deep sleep. The intruders would be the last people he ever saw.
Get out of here.
Short tried to flee, but he had no chance against the brothers and their accomplice. They threatened to kill him unless he turned over his keys to the bank.
Leave me alone. I haven't done shut up.
Silencing him, the intruders dragged Short outside. The terror continued as Short was stuffed into the front seat of the van. Each criminal drove one of the vehicles, including Short's red pickup, as they sped off for the bank. Agent Farley and the prosecutors continued piecing together the events of October 6th. The Agofskys and their accomplice pulled up to the bank, only a brief drive from Short's house. With their captive in tow, the robbers quickly opened the bank's front door and ran in. No alarms sounded because Short had neglected to set them, and no one would ever be able to see what was about to happen.
Let's go to their desk.
After ripping the duct tape off his mouth, they pulled Short over to his desk and retrieved the keys to the safe. Then they forced him to provide the vault's combination.
Hurry up. 42 right.
Once inside, they grabbed all that was in reach.
Get him out, get out.
and dashed away.
Go, I'll blow your head off. Move it.
They dumped the loot in the truck. Afraid for his life, Short complied with their every demand. But the assailants pistol whipped him and knocked him out. On the way out of Noel, Buddy Mills crossed paths with the brothers. After he passed the intersection, the three vehicles sped off, the first two heading toward Grand Lake. Reaching Grand Lake, some 22 miles from Noel, the two remaining vehicles stopped along the high point of the Cowskin Bridge. Here, Shannon and the unknown accomplice prepared to kill Short by drowning him. In his haste, Shannon took off his gloves to secure a portion of the tape.
Shut up!
And unknowingly left greasy fingerprints behind.
Stop! What are you doing? Shut up! Stop! Don't do this.
Then the two attached the stolen chain hoist.
I'll do anything. Anything you want.
When they finished, they lifted Short above the lake.
Oh, no! No!
And plunged him into the black water below. At the first trial in September 1992, the evidence was strong enough to persuade a jury to convict Shannon and Joe Agofsky of 3 federal crimes relating to the robbery, abduction, and use of firearms during the illegal acts. In the state trial, only Shannon was found guilty of murder. Though the unidentified accomplice was never found, it was determined that the Agofsky brothers were the masterminds and principal perpetrators of the crime. No charges were brought against their mother, Sheila.
Without doubt, this was the most difficult investigation I've been involved in as an FBI agent. Some 29 years of investigating various crimes. This was an unusually heinous crime.
Today, Joe and Shannon Agofsky are serving life sentences with no chance of parole. For his cooperation, Gant Sanders served the remainder of his firearms charge on probation. Noel has returned to normal, a violent chapter in its history now closed. Yet because of the crimes of these blood brothers, it will never be the same quiet, innocent place it once was. October 8th, 1985, marked the beginning of a string of brutal robberies that rocked South Florida.
Go!
Two masked men used military weapons in a violent spree that threatened innocents. But no one knew who they were or where they would strike next. Before the FBI could stop them, lives would be lost, and law enforcement would be changed forever.
In Miami, a gang of robbers targeted banks and armored cars. They carried assault weapons and weren't afraid to use them. They struck during the day and sometimes twice a day. For a while, they seemed unstoppable. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. We knew that to stop these criminals would require stealth, ingenuity, and perhaps a little luck. No one expected to become one of the bloodiest chapters in FBI history.
Miami, Florida, 1985. To FBI agents, it seemed a city under siege. Each week, there were 3 to 5 bank robberies. Kidnappings, major drug deals, and shootings were everyday occurrences. But just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, a new breed of outlaws hit the streets and turned the Miami crime wave into a war. On October 8th, an armored car courier made a scheduled pickup at a steak and ale restaurant. The driver waited for his partner to return, unaware that two heavily armed men were also waiting nearby. As the guard approached the rear of the truck, the gunman advanced with military-style precision.
Hold it! Come out! I can't. Open the door! Open the door!
The driver refused to open his door. He drove away following company policy. The subjects retreated to a getaway car and attempted to camouflage their escape with a military-issue smoke grenade. The Metro-Dade County Police and the FBI responded to the scene. Robberies of armored cars and banks fall under FBI jurisdiction. The supervisor of the Miami FBI's Violent Crimes Unit was Special Agent Gordon McNeil.
There were basically no clues as far as who these individuals were. We had absolutely no idea, no way to go. No one had seen them without the black hoods over their faces. They wore gloves on both hands.
One piece of information witnesses did provide was the license number of the getaway car. Agents tracked the number and learned the car had been stolen a month before. But the lead was a dead end. The robbers had escaped with only $2,800. But their use of military weapons and commando tactics convinced Agent McNeil they would probably strike somewhere in Miami again. But where and when? The answer came just 8 days later. At a busy supermarket on South Dixie Highway, another armored car arrived to make a scheduled pickup. A courier returned to the truck with several money bags filled with cash and receipts. He never saw the car that came around the corner. Escaped empty-handed. Metro-Dade Police and the FBI quickly responded to the alarm.
6 Adam 31, 1097.
These men were clearly not afraid to use deadly force. The courier would later die from his injury. While he was taken to the hospital, agents interviewed his partner. As he described the gunmen, it quickly became obvious they were probably the same men responsible for the previous robbery at the Steak and Ale restaurant.
There was no money taken in that particular robbery, but there were a number of shots fired. So the ante was still going up here as far as I was concerned because of the continued use of violence by these two individuals.
Ballistics evidence would further confirm the connection between the two robberies. Investigators found double-aught buckshot from a 12-gauge shotgun, 45 caliber bullet casings, and 223 shell casings. The 223s seemed most significant.
And the identification division of the firearms unit of the FBI laboratory compared those two shell casings and said they were fired from the same weapon. So we definitely had a link now between the Winn-Dixie attempt and the Steak and Ale robbery.
Two violent robberies were linked to the same masked gunman. But there were no leads to their identities. Because they had not scored any cash at the Winn-Dixie robbery and so little at the Steak and Ale, investigators were certain they would soon strike again. 2 weeks later, on Friday, November 8th, a third robbery occurred. This time a bank job at the Florida National Bank. As a teller and a guard walked from the main building to the drive-thru, two masked gunmen emerged from a car. At gunpoint, they ordered the teller to open the door to the drive-thru.
Get it open now!
She tried to comply, but there was a problem with the key.
Hurry up!
Stalled in broad daylight at a busy intersection, the gunman aborted the robbery and fled with only the $10,000 the guard had been carrying. Within minutes, local authorities and the FBI Violent Crimes Unit responded to the scene of the crime. Just a few blocks away from the two previous robberies.
This pattern was starting to develop that all these crimes were happening in this same general area along U.S. Highway number 1.
FBI interviews with the bank employees confirmed that the robbers were the same pair who'd hit the armored cars. Maybe they figured a drive-through bank would be less heavily fortified than armored cars, easier sources of cash.
There was no higher priority in this case. We had to find these guys, and we had to get them off the street before they killed more innocent people.
But just an hour and a half later, they hit the Professional Savings Bank only 18 blocks away.
Get your hands up! Get your hands up! Get on over there! Get out of the ground! On the ground now! Get out! Get down! Get down! You, come here! Come on over here! Come on! You, come over here!
The robbers quickly took control of the lobby. At gunpoint, both customers and employees quickly followed their orders. With their masks and high-powered weapons, no one doubted they meant business.
Face down!
This time, they scored big. They raced off with over $41,000, delivered earlier that day by Wells Fargo. They escaped in yet another getaway car, a Chevy Monte Carlo. Witnesses had little to tell agents. The robbers had entered quickly and forced everyone down on the floor where they couldn't see what was going on. But since the men had actually been inside the bank this time, perhaps the security cameras had captured them on tape. Agents were soon disappointed to learn that the cameras had somehow malfunctioned and nothing had been recorded. It was the fourth robbery in 6 weeks. The heavily armed robbers were looting banks and armored cars in broad daylight.
The witnesses in these cases indicated that they felt that these people looked like true professionals. The way they walked, the way they talked, the way they carried the weapons. And I truly believed up until when we finally found out who they were, that we could very easily have been dealing with police officers here or very recent ex-military.
With such violent criminals on the loose, agents honed their own skills on the firing range. They worked the case relentlessly, exchanging whatever slim leads they had. But nothing panned out. 2 months went by without another robbery, and still there were no leads. On Friday, January 10th, 1986, William Roberts prepared to make a transaction at the Barnett Bank, just as an armored truck was unloading outside. He looked up from his checkbook and watched as two masked robbers shot the guard in the back. As the guard lay on the ground, one of the gunmen shot him twice more. This was the robbers' fifth heist in just 3 months, and another big hit. They fled with $54,000. William Roberts trailed the men for blocks. Though he maintained a safe distance, Roberts worried the thieves knew he was following them. Still, he stayed on their tail and noted their license tag and car model. He tracked them to a parking lot where they pulled in next to a white pickup truck. Roberts parked across the street and continued to watch them. He noted the make and model of the pickup truck, but could not see the tag number. After driving off, Roberts would flag down an officer and tell him the story. The FBI responded to the scene and interviewed bank employees. They found several .223 rounds, later determined to be fired from the same weapon used in the first two robberies. Nearby, FBI agents examined the getaway car the robbers had left behind. But William Roberts was the star witness. Thanks to Roberts, the FBI had the first big break in a 3-month string of violent robberies. A check on the license tag of the getaway car revealed the car was registered to a man named Aureliano Brielle. Agents prepared to pay him a visit. Since the car had never been reported stolen, they suspected Brielle was involved in the crimes. They dressed for safety. In Miami, the FBI had been tracking 2 masked gunmen who had been robbing armored cars and banks, already killing 1 guard. Now agents had located the registered owner of one of the getaway cars. On January 14th, Special Agent Morellis and a partner arrived at the home of Aureliano Brielle, the registered owner of the car. A woman opened the door. Special Agent Morellis now works undercover and wears a hood to protect his identity.
She asked me if I was there about her son, and I said, yes, I was, as a matter of fact. She said, well, my son Emilio has been missing.
Mrs. Brielle's husband came to the door, and they invited the agents to come into the house. Mr. Brielle explained that his son Emilio had disappeared 3 months ago with the family car, which he borrowed to go target shooting in the Everglades. The Brielles had filed a missing persons report, but heard nothing. They had hoped the agents brought news of their son. But both the Brielles and the agents would be disappointed. The FBI knew nothing of the young man's whereabouts. And as the interview progressed, Agent Morellis grew certain the Brielles knew nothing of the robberies.
The conclusion at the end of the day was that the Brielle family was not involved. They were victims. Their car had been stolen and their son was missing.
The Metro-Dade Police Department processed the Brielle's car with FBI agents observing. But evidence technicians found no fingerprints or anything else to advance the case. The next 2 months were quiet again, though the robbers remained on the loose. Agents worked other cases as they continued to mine every possible resource for clues. Then on March 14th, Special Agent Ben Grogan told a skeptical Agent Morellis about a newspaper article he believed was related to the case.
Show up in the next heist. I guarantee it. That car right
The
there.
article reported the attempted murder of a man named Jose Collazo 2 days earlier. Two men had shot Collazo multiple times. Then they had stolen his gun and his car, a black 1982 Chevy Monte Carlo.
Guarantee you I'm right.
Grogan swore that the vehicle would be the bank robber's next getaway car. While it seemed to some agents nothing more than a hunch, they respected Grogan.
Car and disappeared. Shot him 4 times with the arm, through the face.
At 53, he was a career agent with 25 years on the job, including time as a SWAT team leader.
Is he still alive? Yeah, he got up, walked 1.5 miles to a convenience store, made a phone
His colleagues called him the doctor because he could do jobs no one else could do.
What do you think? Check on these plates.
So they took a chance on his hunch.
Get on it. Good job.
Mr. Collazo, tell me what happened. These 2 guys.
Grogan and another agent visited Collazo in the hospital.
They were 2 white males. 2 white males.
Collazo was in rough shape, with wounds to the side of his head, his arm, and his back. But he managed to tell the story of his nightmarish afternoon in the Everglades. Collazo had gone to a recreational trail near a lake, where gun owners often practice target shooting. He was firing his .22 when 2 men drove up beside him.
How you doing?
The driver pulled a gun on Collazo,
Hold up, shut up.
who somehow had the presence of mind to identify it as a steel blue Magnum revolver.
Shut up.
He pegged the other man's rifle as a Ruger Mini 14.
Shut up. Give him the gun. Give him the gun.
When the assailants demanded Collazo's guns, car, and wallet, he complied.
Now back on up. Back up. Give you everything. Back up. Shut up.
But they shot him several times anyway,
Back up.
at close range. Then they left, taking Collazo's Monte Carlo and their own F-150 pickup truck. As they drove off, they believed Collazo was dead. He was just waiting until the shooters were gone. Then he would rally what little strength he had to survive.
Collazo had to make a decision as to whether he would try to live or just lay down and die. And Collazo said he chose to try to live, so he picked himself up out of that lake and walked almost 1 mile after being shot 3 times to seek help.
Finding Collazo was the best break in the case so far. He provided the single clue no witness until now could offer: a description of the suspects' faces. They had not worn masks when they assaulted him. Using Collazo's description, a Dade County police artist drew composite sketches of his assailants. The drawings would be made into posters with information about the suspects and their crimes, plus the warning that both men were heavily armed and extremely dangerous. Retired Special Agent John Hanlon, a 22-year FBI veteran then assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit, remembers what Collazo said.
Collazo was able to give a description of the guys, He told us about the white pickup truck. He was shot in the same general area as we thought Emilio Brielle had disappeared.
In the coming days, agents stepped up their efforts. They conducted a grid search of the streets crossing South Dixie Highway in the vicinity of the bank robberies.
I got the agents together. After I told them what I had on my mind, they looked at me like I was crazy. But I said, I want you to get down between 88th Street on South Dixie Highway and 185th Street and come up with any license numbers on white Ford F-150 pickup trucks. Something just told me in my gut that perhaps, who knows, we're trying to make our own luck. What is it, $1 million to 1, 10 million to 1? I don't know. But they came back with the license numbers of 10 white Ford F-150 pickup trucks.
Computerized checks of the license numbers would reveal the owners' names. Agents would then request driver's license photos from the Department of Motor Vehicles. Perhaps if Collazo saw the photos, he could identify the truck's owner. But in 1986, technology was slow, and before the photos came back from the DMV, the robbers struck again. On Wednesday, March 19th, just 1 week after Collazo's assault.
Get your hands up! Get your hands up! Hurry up! Get out! Get out! Get down! On the floor! Both of us! Come on out! Get out!
The thieves hit another bank on South Dixie Highway.
Back up! Get out! Come on! Get out! Give me the bag! Give me the bag!
It was their 6th hit in 5 months.
Give me the money! Get out! Put your face down! Be quiet!
One kept the terrified customers at bay. The other looted money from a teller.
Stand, everybody! Go, move! Don't look up!
The men escaped with over $8,000 in cash. As customers and employees recovered from the assault, an off-duty customs official who had seen the robbers flee called police. He'd noted the make of the getaway car, a black Chevy Monte Carlo, and the tag number, NTJ 891. Just as Agent Grogan had predicted, it was Jose Collazo's car.
They didn't even change the tag. And we're not really sure whether they were, well, we're pretty sure they weren't that stupid, but we speculate that in their minds, you know, they were these hard men. And we think that they were probably just saying, hey, in your face, police, you know, come and get us if you can.
Investigators learned little of value from witnesses. At this bank, the security cameras had filmed the entire robbery. But the videotape was of little use. The camera's lenses had captured little more than unidentifiable masked bandits. There was little doubt these robbers planned each hit carefully.
It appeared to me that they were doing surveillance of the banks prior to some of the robberies, because on most occasions, they robbed the bank within 10 minutes of delivery of a cash shipment by an armored car company. So they were waiting until the cash was inside from the armored car company and then hit the bank.
On April 10th, Gordon McNeil and Ben Grogan discussed the case at firearms practice, sifting for any clues they may have overlooked. It had been about 3 weeks since the last robbery. There were no clues to the thieves' identities, but McNeil detected a pattern.
You're always looking in law enforcement for, you know, for patterns of crime, things that seem to happen on a consistent basis. And the only thing that we had gone in these cases was this significant pattern that developed, always on Friday between 9 and 12, hitting the same banks multiple times, always in the same 40 square block area, always along South Dixie Highway.
Agents planned a surveillance for the next day. They would fan out to patrol the area where the robbers had struck so often.
Hey guys, you got a minute?
Yeah.
Unit Supervisor Gordon McNeil personally led the operation.
Everybody will leave from that location.
We just couldn't wait for them to rob another bank. We had to get out there and we had to make our own luck, and maybe we could find them.
Start watching for the vehicle. If you come across
Agent Hanlon remembers what happened next.
put it into play and hopefully it'll work out.
Eddie Morales walked over and said, "Hey, let's go down there." And I thought, well, what the heck, you know? So as a whim, I mean, there was no pressure to go or anything of that kind. I mean, I certainly had enough to do, and I liked Eddie, and I figured, well, we'll go on down there, we'll ride down, and you know, rather cavalierly, and spend some good times with Ed, and we'll take it from there.
Many believed it was a long shot, but 14 Miami FBI agents met in a parking lot at 8:45 a.m. on Friday, April 11th, 1986. They would surveil a 53-block grid along South Dixie Highway, where 2 commando-style gunmen had pulled off 3 bank robberies and 3 armored car heists in 6 months. The suspects were described as white men, of medium build, one with a handlebar mustache, both about 30 years old. They were heavily armed and extremely dangerous. They might be driving a black Monte Carlo, license number NTJ 891. After a robbery spree that had lasted 6 months, Miami FBI agents went on the offensive in search of 2 killers, possibly driving a black Monte Carlo. They met to patrol an area where the 2 armed robbers had used military tactics to hit armored cars and banks. All would be stationed along the major thoroughfare of South Dixie Highway. Agents Ben Grogan and Jerry Dove were on their way to stake out the Barnett Bank when the impossible happened. A car that fit the description of the suspect's vehicle pulled directly in front of them. In disbelief, Agent Grogan advised all units of what he saw.
Attention all units, we're behind. A black vehicle.
Gordon McNeil remembers the call.
Grogan was not an emotional person. Nothing could get Grogan excited. And I still remember his voice. He said, "We're behind a black Chevrolet Monte Carlo, Dade, Florida tag, NTJ 891. He said, "That's the tag, isn't it, Gordo?" I mean, he was just incredulous.
Agents Morales and Hanlon were stationed at the Professional Savings Bank when they heard Grogan's call. They began to search for their colleagues. Hanlon was driving, with Morales working the radio. Hanlon tried to get a gauge on Grogan and Dove's location.
And I remember saying to Eddie, I mean, call Ben, tell him to start calling the cross streets so we'll know how close we're getting. Before Eddie had a chance to go on the air, Ben starts calling off the cross streets, and we're hitting those cross streets, you know, one after another, so we were real close to them.
After proceeding south for several blocks, Hanlon and Morales closed in behind them. The robbers soon suspected they were being followed. Whether they knew their pursuers were FBI or not, the suspects wanted to lose them. They took a right turn on 117th Street into a residential neighborhood, quiet at this time of day.
You're still following?
Still behind us.
They're coming.
They turned right again, trying to lose the tail. But the agents hung on, playing for time, as Agent Morales recalls.
We were just trying to wait for as many FBI units to get to the location as possible. And we were also basically responding to what the subjects did. They weren't in any hurry. When they turned onto 120th Street, they actually slowed down.
The caravan continued on, with the agents always concerned about endangering innocent bystanders. Then the suspects made a left onto 82nd. It appeared they were heading back to the busy highway, where civilians would be at risk should a confrontation turn violent. When Grogan saw the silhouette of a long-barreled rifle through the rear window of the subject's vehicle, he knew it was time to act.
Got any car stop, let's do it.
It was clear the suspects were preparing to do battle. Grogan put the light on his car and ordered a felony stop. Grogan pulled alongside the suspect's car and ordered them to stop. The suspects ignored the order, and Grogan pulled ahead of them, blocking their escape. Hanlon and Morellis moved up, boxing them in. The sight made an indelible impression on veteran agent John Hanlon.
And I'll never forget the man's face. I mean, I could pick him out today. I mean, he looked like your basic Western bad man. He looked very, very determined.
It seemed the suspects were as desperate to prevail as the agents who pursued them. Two heavily armed fugitives had ignored FBI orders to stop their vehicle. Special agents now tried to force them to comply. The last to catch up to the group was Agent Richard Manauzi. As he pulled behind the suspect's car, he saw one of the gunmen take aim at Morellis and Hanlon. Manauzi rammed the fugitive's car from behind.
They swung into a U-turn, and then Manauzi was able to hit him again and knocked him over into this parking area up against some cars over there.
The passenger opened fire with a Mini-14 assault rifle. Outgunned, Agent Manauzi crawled to cover. Agent McNeil arrived seconds later, firing at point-blank range. They were surrounded by FBI. Their vehicle could not move, but they had superior firepower. And they refused to surrender. The driver fired a shotgun blast at Grogan. McNeil hit the driver in the neck. But the semi-automatic kept pumping out the rounds until one finally caught McNeil in the hand. Morellis and Hanlon advanced to cover him. Hanlon's .38 held 5 rounds. The Mini-14 had 30 rounds in each clip. And one of them shot down Agent Morellis.
was all one continuous recollection. It was like 1 second I'm looking at Gordon McNeil's back, trying to maneuver to his left, and the next second is blue sky. And I looked at my left arm, and my left arm was completely shattered. It was like roadkill.
His partner was down, but the shooter kept on firing. But when he tried to escape out the window, Jerry Dove hit him in the chest with his 9mm. But to Dove's horror, the man shot McNeil in the neck.
I couldn't move my upper body, I couldn't move my arm, and I couldn't move my legs. So I assumed that I was totally paralyzed at that particular point. I couldn't move.
2 more FBI agents arrived and joined the gunfight. By now, the shooter had been hit 4 times, but he continued to advance and fire.
He just made up his mind that he was going down, he was going out, and he was going to take as many of us with him as he possibly could.
The agents knew they were outgunned, firing 6 shooters against the suspect's 30-round semi-automatic assault weapons. Dove and Grogan were forced to retreat behind their car to reload. Hanlon, too, reloaded. But the shooter kept on coming.
One went right through my knuckles on my right hand and through the knuckle in my thumb. A bunch of lead and whatever went into the back of my arm, and I remember my gun going flying. I said, "Ben, I've been hit."
As Hanlon tried to retreat under the bumper, the gunman shot him in the groin.
The blood geysered from my groin to my knee. I mean, the blood just came out like a balloon breaking.
Grogan was hit. And then Dove. Before they could reload their weapons.
I remember Ben saying, "Oh my God," and he fell at my feet. And at some point along in here, I heard the breath go out of him. He went, "Ah."
The subject made his way to Agent Dove's car. With his left arm nearly blown off, Agent Morellis managed to pull himself out. The shooter was trying to flee, and Morellis had to stop him. Mortally wounded, the second suspect somehow dragged himself out of his car and joined his partner. If the car started, Morellis knew they could only go in reverse, back over the fallen agents.
Eventually, I just got angry because I knew internally that I was dying, and my one last thought was, hey, if I'm going to die, I'm going to take these guys with me. I'm going to make sure that they're dead.
With his shotgun empty, Morellis changed to his revolver and staggered forward, firing at the subjects. Morellis' shots lodged in the men's spines, killing them both. It was a violent end to the lives of 2 violent men. Just a few minutes after it began, the bloodiest firefight in FBI history ended in tragedy. 2 agents were dead and 5 wounded. 2 suspects still unidentified had also been killed.
Over here! Hurry up! Hey, let's have killing me, man!
Agent Jerry Dove lay dead. At the age of 30, he'd earned a law degree and fulfilled his boyhood dream of joining the FBI. He wanted to make a difference and had given his life trying. His partner, Ben Grogan, had also perished in the firefight. He had been just 1 year away from retirement when his wife could finally have stopped worrying about her husband's dangerous career. Crime scene technicians arrived at the site. Metro-Dade County Homicide Bureau Sergeant David Rivers was also there. Rivers had the Herculean task of reconstructing 5 minutes of living terror. That would take weeks.
Well, we have to find out what happened. And you do that in various ways. You obviously speak to the agents that were involved, and they can tell you what each one of them did individually. And then part of that is to take those different statements as to what they did individually and match it up with the physical evidence. The wounds on the body, the bullet holes in the cars, where the guns are located, where the cars are located, and to reconstruct it to make sure everything's exactly interpreted properly.
Technicians recovered 143 bullets fired from the fugitive's weapons. Questions that had plagued agents for so long were finally being answered. The Ruger Mini 14 rifle used to kill agents Grogan and Dove would match the .223 bullets found at some of the armored car and bank robbery scenes. In fact, the FBI crime lab could now forensically link the killers with several of the earlier heists. And from fingerprints, the agents soon identified the subjects as 32-year-old Michael Lee Platt and 34-year-old William Russell Maddox. But one question remained. What kind of men had wreaked this destruction, and why? Agents could not have been more surprised by what they learned from the killer's friends and neighbors. Instead of outlaws living on the edge, prepared for the ultimate confrontation, Platt and Maddox were known as quiet, family men. Photos showed their families relaxing together. Platt had a wife and 3 children. Maddox was a single dad. They were partners in a landscaping business. But further investigation gave up the lie of their double life. Inside a shed, agents found guns and ammunition, including the .22 Maddox and Platt had stolen from Jose Collazo when they tried to kill him in the Everglades. Agents would also uncover evidence of a bizarre murder pact in which the men may have killed each other's previous wives. No one had been charged in the 2 cases, but now they would be reopened. Within days, agents would confirm that Maddox and Platt had killed 25-year-old Emilio Brielle in the Everglades. A hiker found Brielle's skeletal remains in the Everglades, not far from where Collazo had been assaulted. Then another tragic footnote surfaced.
Hey, how did that interview go for you earlier today?
Special Agent Steve Warner received a package from the Florida Department of Motor Vehicles. In it was a copy of William Russell Maddox's driver's license. He was the owner of one of the white Ford F-150 pickup trucks agents had located a few weeks before. But there had been a delay in sending the licenses.
If they had arrived April 11th or prior to that, Collazo would have been able to positively identify Maddox, and we probably would have been able to arrest Maddox and also Platt, and 2 FBI agents wouldn't have been killed. But that's not the way the luck worked out in this particular case.
The FBI investigation revealed that both of the killers had served in the military. Platt had been a ranger, a member of the Army's elite First Strike Force, which explained the pair's commando tactics, fundamentally different than training received by law enforcement.
We don't have an acceptable body count in civilian law enforcement. We're taught one way, and that's defensive type shooting. You take cover, you do not take casualties. And then you look at the way Platt reacted that day. He reacted in a military fashion. He had the heavier weapon. He had the Mini 14 with a 30-round capacity. His back was basically against the wall. He had no place to go, so he advanced forward on our position, laying down suppression fire, and ambushed Grogan and Dove, who were behind the car.
As agents finally put the pieces together, a frightening portrait emerged of two formidable adversaries.
At the end of the shooting, Platt had 11 hits, Maddox had 6 hits. Platt was literally shot to pieces, and he kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting until he ran out of breath. He fought to the last.
They were going to die, it's just they weren't dying fast enough. And they weren't prepared to lay down and die. You know? They weren't about to give up.
Out of this tragedy came some positive changes that have improved the safety of all in the law enforcement community. Agents and officers now carry more powerful weapons, and their training better prepares them for violent confrontations like the one on April 11th, 1986. As hundreds mourn the deaths of 2 dedicated and selfless FBI agents, those in law enforcement have looked for meaning in the tragic events of that April morning. Over the years, Gordon McNeil has found some resolution.
The story's not Platt and Maddox. It's not important who they were. It's important to recall the courage that was shown by the agents that day and the FBI. They did their job.